Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Lochaber Committee. It's just to let you know that the chairman's having technical issues joining the meeting at the moment, so we do hope that he will join us soon. But so the meeting's not delayed, I would like to ask members to appoint an interim chair until the chairman can join. So can I have a nomination, please?
Could I nominate Councillor Thompson if he's agreeable, please, Alistair? Thank you.
I'm happy to do it, Dennis, unless somebody else feels the urge.
Okay, I think that's unanimous, Councillor Thompson. So I'll hand over to yourself.
Great, thank you very much, Alistair. You'll have to bear with me because I'm going to have to flick between screens to go through the agenda. Okay, thank you all for attending this latest meeting of the Lochaber Area Committee. I won't go through the usual Teams type introduction. I think we're all aware of that. First item on our order of business today is apologies for absence. Alistair, do you want to take the roll, please?
Yes, Chair. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Alan Henderson and also Councillor Blair Allen. And I can see everyone else is in attendance apart from, as I said before, Councillor Baxter, who hopes to join us soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Alistair. Next item of business is declarations of interest. Members, do you have any declarations of interest? Dennis, I can see you're first with your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Two declarations of interest. Item 5, non-financial, as the Council's nominee to the Board of Lochaber Housing Association, and item 8, non-financial, as the Council's nominee to the Isle of Rum Community Trust. But in both cases, it doesn't preclude me from taking part in the discussion and the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. I don't see any other hands up for declarations of interest from other committee members. That case, we're on to our first item on the agenda, which is the Police Scotland Local Committee Performance Report. And I see that Inspector Nick is here to introduce that report. Nick, can I hand over to you, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I think you all know me, but I'll just introduce myself, Inspector Nick Hoff from Propulsion Police Station. I'm the current Lochaber area inspector. I've been in the role now for 10 months, haven't taken over from Isla Campbell. So good morning, everyone. If I haven't spoken to any of you directly, hopefully most of you will know me by now. I'll go ahead and give the sort of police area performance report. Does everyone did everyone receive a copy of the sort of the statistical data based under the priorities, or can they see that at the moment?
Yeah, Nick, that report it's been circulated and it's been published as well. So
that's grand.
Be able to access it.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to double check, and I'll run through it and I'll try to focus. I think which is the sort of the idea on the local sort of priorities, which reference our local policing plan, and sort of obviously give you some corresponding information on the sort of the background story, should we say, to the figures and our sort of local priorities and prevention and intervention process that we sort of engage in with our partners to tackle all these areas which are obviously headed under the local policing plan. So obviously the first section is the priority mentioning road safety and road crime, with the intention being to collaborate to reduce casualties and crime on our roads. The statistics there, the first one, the target to reduce the number of people killed on the roads in Lochaber. You can see that's a -6. There's only one fatal accident in the area the year to date between 2020 and 2021, and that's obviously a significant reduction. Obviously the main focus of, I suppose, the reflection of that is significantly a part of the sort of the COVID restrictions and the lockdown process, which just dramatically sort of negated traffic on our roads in the early period of 2020 through March, April, May and June, and the sort of actual RTC that is noted there, which was the only fatal RTC that occurred at Glengloy, was into October, towards the end of the year. So we had a significant, I suppose, number of periods of days where there were very few vehicles on the road. That said, it has to be set in the context, I think, of the fact that last year we did, through the summer, once the measures were eased, we did see quite a lot of traffic back on the roads again, and quite a lot of people visiting the area. So it's a sort of encouraging statistic, if one can call it that, in terms of the fact that there has been a reduction. But I fully expect that to probably increase again next year, more in line with our sort of 5-year average. In terms of the number of people detected for drink and drug driving offences, that's obviously an increase. The year to date is 38 is the total number. I've done a little bit more research into that just on our local systems, and the number of stops for drug driving, specifically when I say stops or actual tests for drug driving, was 46. But obviously not all of those would have equated to a sort of a direct actual detection for people being convicted of that offence or charged with that offence. So that process, has to be said, is still a long drawn out process, in terms of the fact that we use the drug wipes if we suspect people to be driving under the influence of drugs, and then they have a blood test taken, and actually there's still a big backlog on those to be processed in terms of the blood test analysing whether or not the person is over the limit, and then a conviction coming out of that. So there's still a sort of rolling sort of a set of figures really probably to come to fruition as a result of those drug driving stops. Now again, I think I've mentioned this before, that number of 46 is just specific individual cases. It does, if there is another offence that's included and the background to that, maybe it's a road traffic accident or another more significant offence, the sort of the drug driving figures will, although that corrected to that number, that 38 is obviously the number of people detected. Those can sometimes be linked into other offences, which I wouldn't find in my specific drug driving search, which I did when I found that there were 46 total proactive sort of drug wipe processes conducted. That doesn't mean that there weren't people who were stopped for other things, and one was conducted at the same time. Also of note, there were 14 cases that I was able to check of careless stroke dangerous driving reports put in, and probably that figure is probably quite reflective. I think that again can come about as a result of RTCs, road traffic collisions, and people being found to be, meeting the criteria relevant for report. Has to be said that over the years that criteria is significantly reduced now. So if it's a minor collision and where there's just some general carelessness, should we say, involved, if there's not significant injury or the person's not a very, very young driver, or there's some other significant factors, they are quite often dealt with by fixed penalties rather than direct reports to the proper fiscal. So that would be the more serious incidents, 14, which probably quite reflective of our process to continue to challenge driver behaviour and detect the offences where we believe that that behaviour has not been appropriate and the driving has fallen significantly below the standard required. The number of people detected for speeding, that's increased only by 4, but that's probably quite indicative of the fact, again, we did have obviously a large period where people weren't on the roads, so that's actually that would show probably quite a good increase really on the previous year to date. That number of 517 has come within a period where there was literally no one on the road for 3 months. And in fact, we were quite specifically told not to engage in speed detection work during the lockdown. So that sort of figure represents increased proactive patrols and targeting of speeders in the Lochaber area. The mobile number of people detected for mobile phone offences has gone down by 5. But again, probably offset that with the fact that literally the 3 or 4 months there were no one on the roads. That probably shows that there's more proactivity being involved there. And actually, we had a recent, obviously won't include in this figures, we had a recent operation called Operation Tramline in this local area where the road policing unit were down, and they actually, I'll not actually reveal the tactic that they used to detect mobile phone usage and texting at the wheel and things, because that would perhaps be a might get out in the local community. However, they had a very successful period here just a couple of weeks ago where several people were detected for texting at the wheel and using let's just say that they use a vehicle that enables them to see better than they would if they were just in a normal police vehicle, and that helps them with their processes. And I think, and then obviously there's a road, the detected seatbelt offences, which is down, but again probably reflective of the fact that there was also a period where people weren't on the road. I'll take questions at the end. I'll just few other bits and pieces I noted in terms of the local perspective. There's an operation that the road policing officers and the road policing unit focus on, which you may see gets mentioned quite often in social media, which is an Operation Close Pass, which is relevant to people passing cyclists inappropriately. I've noted, in my time in the role here, that I don't think that's specifically happened down in the Lochaber area, so I do have taken a note to that, and I'd like to try and engage over the next few months to get the road policing officers to come down and specifically have an event of that in the Lochaber area, particularly with the increased number of cyclists we have in the area now using the A82 and things that have significantly increased over the last few years. I think that would be very beneficial. If you're not aware of that, it's there's a unmarked vehicle follows a police officer who's riding a bicycle, and if people drive past the cyclist too quickly, they engage in education and potentially also issue a ticket. And I think the other sort of local points of note in terms of the road safety matters are obviously the very, very welcome introduction of the 20-mile-per-hour zones in the community, and we have been engaging and already started to proactively detect people who are not observing the 20-mile-an-hour limit and give advice or tickets if it's appropriate or necessary. Moving on to the item 2 in terms of our priorities, which is the acquisitive crime, reduce crime through preventing offending and reducing reoffending, and with partners we should support education, prevention and diversionary enforcement activity to acquisitive crime. I think the most important thing is to obviously explain that acquisitive crime covers a huge umbrella now, and it will sort of flow into a couple of the other items that I'll mention later in the agenda. But the first figure on the report there, the theft by housebreaking, is an increase of 2 from last year, which is pretty much on par with the 5-year average and the 3-year average of 30, floating around the 29 or 31 mark. Just important to note, I think that theft by housebreaking is a terminology now which includes sort of outbuildings that have significant levels of security and things. So I think it's important just to sort of try and give a bit of local perspective on the fact that we don't have 30 houses broken into every year when people are sort of in their houses, I think, and there are people within the premises trying to steal things. These obviously tend to occur when the premises are not don't have people in them, and they are empty premises, normally over the weekends or over the period of the night time when they're not being so properly attended to in terms of people being within them. The one thing I would say there is that the detection rate of 43% is a little bit disappointing. I know that we have actually this year, obviously since March, had a couple of significant investigations which have been in relation to some industrial dwellings that were sort of targeted, and we've got a good series of links with the criminals who've been involved with it, and that should hopefully increase that detection rate as we move into the next year. The number of theft by shopliftings, that's obviously down, and that was effectively during COVID and the lockdown process. Shops weren't open, but also people were not going out, and so that significantly reduces that sort of number. I did actually do a check. I think our current detection rate for theft by shoplifting is 67%, and they are quite often the regular individuals, shall we say, who are involved in these crimes, and they're in the local sort of smaller shops, and they're for lower value, shall we say, or small numbers of items, and the process for identifying them is normally quite straightforward. There are some occasions when, because of CCTV and the staff noticing the theft after the person's left the premises, we only have some blurry images of CCTV to go on, and that's a little bit difficult. But if staff observe someone leaving the shop or a process ongoing, we have a very, very good hit rate to actually have them detected and arrested and charged with the offence. And then the theft of motor vehicles, very low number, 6, that's -3 on the year, and I did a check on that. It says the detection rate is 50%, but actually I think one of those other incidents has since been detected, so that would take us up to 66.6% for a detection rate for that on that current year to date. Again, it's a crime that we're very, very lucky that doesn't occur much, and I'm afraid that the few that do happen normally have been local people rather than sort of travelling criminals. The theft, the number of theft from motor vehicles, again 8, very low. Another crime that we just don't see very often here, and that it is reflective, I think, of the sort of the local well-being and security that people feel in the area, and the sort of the idea of vehicle theft and people having things stolen is in our sort of visitor areas and our areas of outdoor sort of leisure interest, still a very low number and very encouraging to see. The priority of serious organised crime, that the intention to reduce harm and cause harm, the harm caused by serious and organised crime, including cyber-related crime. That is a objective to work with partners to safeguard the Highland area by taking opportunities to prevent crime and make the Highland area a hostile environment for serious and organised crime groups. This actual priority tends to sort of overlap with a couple of other bits, but I think the main thing to take out of this one, as you can see on the sort of report there, is the prevention and intervention processes in terms of drugs offences and drug organised sort of crime. 15 Misuse of Drugs Act warrants were executed, and all of those, I think 13 of those, I've done a little bit of research, 13 of those were positive, and I think 4 of them ended up being having someone charged with the concern of being concerned in the supply of drugs. Now, that it's important to remember that the intelligence that we need to actually execute a search warrant on a house is quite significant, and the persons who are found within and the items that are found within, depending on the amount of should we say, illicit drugs that are found, would depend on how we proceed with this sort of case. Whilst we might have had intelligence that someone has been involved in dealing drugs, if at the time then when we happen to go in, they don't have that many drugs in the house, we're unfortunately in a position where we often end up only being able to charge them with possession of a various amount of drugs. So it is very rare that we go into a house and don't find, particularly a house that has significant intelligence about the use of drugs and the ongoing personnel that may be going into that house. It's very unusual that we don't find anything, and I'm talking obviously from a perspective of even finding small amounts of cannabis, which personal use cannabis, which is quite often the case. So those figures, the context of that is it shows that I'll be honest, that the number of warrants, 15, is something I would like to increase, and I'm working with the Detective Inspector Andy Bilton, who's from the area, to try and increase that number as we move through the year. And we have had a couple, again, not in that recording year, but we've had a couple of significant drugs inquiries over the last 5 or 6 months, which are not included in those statistical figures, which show that we are continuing to take opportunities to conduct intelligence-led operations for the sort of distribution of drugs. And we do see our intelligence links to, you may have heard the terms county lines drugs operations. There's a lot of intelligence that keeps coming back to show that, from this area, anyone who's obtaining drugs from Glasgow or Liverpool, if that's the involvement, that would be classed as what we call county lines drugs involvement, which is where the drugs are clearly coming in from a different area. To some extent, because of the rural nature of where we are, it's inevitable. As far as we know, we don't have any intelligence at all to show that drugs are being either shipped directly into Lochaber or are being produced in Lochaber, so they have to come from somewhere. So this would obviously come from the larger cities and involve people using transport, and the classic form of transport for people to bring drugs to the Highlands is road vehicles, and our intelligence is very much based around the use of vehicles from some of these crime groups, and the sort of surveillance that would go on to try and target them when we know that they're on the way back from Glasgow or Liverpool with some items in the vehicles. And so move on. I suppose probably one of the most significant areas of the report, which is our priority for antisocial behaviour, violence and disorder, and to engage with the public and communities and to reduce and prevent crimes and behaviour of this sort. The licensed premises, coming on to the licensed premises checks number there, obviously again that's a COVID reflection, down by 266. That's just reflective of the time that the licensed premises were closed. And it would be fair to say that, again, these statistics are significantly affected by the COVID lockdown and the sort of closure of the licensed premises, which has affected our visits, but also the figures that are related to that in terms of disorder and violent crime. Now, remember, I said that a couple of things do link back into some of this. So regarding the previous priority, that number, they increased the number of offences reported for the possession, supply, or being concerned with the supply of controlled substances. So we have had here a 41 increase over the last recording year. So our year-to-date number is 150. Now this is the number that I gave you of 15 previously of drugs warrants executed. That means us going into actual premises, whereas here we can see that we've got the number of 136 cases of possession of controlled drugs, and 14 instances of people being concerned in the charged with being concerned in the supply of drugs. Those 14 can sometimes relate to people who are found with drugs in their vehicles rather than in their house. So that's why that number of drugs warrants being executed of 15, if you just automatically assume that that's 14 people who have been charged with concern in the supply from that figure, that would be a sort of incorrect interpolation. So it's the combination of us having proactive stop checks with people on the street and also proactive stops of these vehicles that we have intelligence about that come through, which sort of provide the combination of those figures for the being concerned in the supply, which are the sort of the more significant incidents of drug. And the drug possessions obviously relate to small amounts of cannabis to even anything up to significantly larger amounts of cannabis, if people can show that they bought them for their own use over a period of time. The next figure, to reduce the number of breach of the peace or threatening behaviour, obviously, again, that's a reflection down by 40. That's a reflection of the licensed premises being closed and people just staying within their houses and not being able to get out and about and mix. And the same goes for our assault figures. Although, having said that, the number of being only down 22 will show that the allocation of incidents of assault is not purely linked to licensed premises and sort of high street disorder. It can show that despite, and to some extent, I suppose, that people living in close proximity to each other through the lockdown, the reports that we would have had of assaults occurring within houses and things, or amongst neighbours who are sort of going a little bit stir crazy, will probably be up on that. So that figure of minus 22 is probably again reflective of the fact that there have been some licensed premises closed, but also not as much of as a reduction as you would think if you were to associate assaults with only occurring in the high street or outside licensed premises. I'll move on. The number of assaults on emergency workers, obviously that's down significantly, and that is again in response to the fact that that is our interaction with people who are drunk and hostile has been largely limited over that recording period. So thankfully those numbers are down. And the one thing I'd like to highlight is that a number of reduced the incidence of vandalism as our target, and it's actually increased by 24, which is a bit disappointing. And I've spoken to several of the councillors here through my time here in terms of our concerns that we have about some of the behaviour of some of the sort of the youths around the community, and I've marked this up following this report to make sure that we are continuing to have regular patrol plans and interaction of the teenagers and the youths who are around our community in the evenings and perhaps involved in this type of vandalism or other behaviour. Having said that, there are plenty of vandalisms that we can allocate to local fallouts between families and feuds and ex-partners and things. So it would be unfair to assume that vandalism is 104 incidents of people randomly going around and spray painting walls or perhaps knocking wing mirrors off cars. But there's no doubt that figure being up 24, which is effectively an increase of 20%, is a little bit disappointing for me to see for our local area. And I'm going to take cognizance of that and work over the next 4 or 5 months to try and have some direct interaction and intervention to prevent those figures being so significant next year. And the priority of protecting vulnerable people, which is number 5 on the list. I would just like to say actually that obviously sort of links back in with those the previous priority in terms of antisocial behaviour and violence, and it's fair to say that a lot of people who suffer assaults and are unfortunate enough to be involved in breach of the peace and threatening abusive behaviour are vulnerable people who, you know, as a result of their circumstances, have vulnerabilities, whether that's alcohol problems, drug problems, or just their situation in terms of their social, their sort of socio-economic position, and that their exposure to some of the other people, I suppose, who are in a similar type of lifestyle. Those are things that we continue to work with our partners to try to minimise. And the people who are highly vulnerable, we obviously have adult support protection meetings with our partners of social work and health and criminal justice to try and reduce the sort of, I suppose, the situation that they are in, so they are not becoming regular victims of crime as a result of their vulnerability. So our attention, obviously, for protecting vulnerable people is to support people considered vulnerable through working with our partners. And unfortunately, the only figure that we have there on that sort of list is the sort of the class 2 crime for the sexual crimes, and that has gone up by 21. And I think I gave an input in one of my first weeks here, similar report about this, and we had a discussion that it's important to remember that those include historical offences which have been recorded in this reporting period. So if people are reporting anything from you know, a couple of months or 20 years previously, those are included in the figures. And it's fair to say that we continue to have an increase in the number of people that are reporting historic sexual offences, and that really fits in with the fact that more and more people are receiving support and advice, I think, and information about being victims and being sort of that type of vulnerability. So they are coming forward and reporting these incidents. And I think, as I said before, there are, as far as I know, and to the best of my recollection, we have very, very low numbers of people who have been reporting sexual assault from well, in fact, it's zero in terms of there being a random stranger attack, and there are even still a small number who are reporting. It would definitely be less than 10, but probably less than 5 if I recollect, people who are reporting sexual offences that have occurred as a result of sort of short-term contact in a social situation, should we say, where people perhaps are intoxicated and they are still then either go back to a hotel or another residence with someone they've met recently in social circumstances. Even those numbers of reports are still very low, and it sort of hopefully fits in with the sort of process of giving people that confidence to report to us if that happens, and hopefully with the inputs that are sort of ongoing from health and other partners, and the sort of the world of social media, people are becoming more and more resilient to sort of representing themselves and looking after themselves, and making sure that they don't become victims of these type of crimes. And the last priority is reference to terrorism and public order, and I think safe to say we are aware of terrorism and counter-terrorism in our area, but very, very fortunate this is almost unheard of in this area, apart from a couple of notable occasions where there have been some sort of representation from what we would call some extremist groups who may be linked to either climate protection or other areas of social interest. But as a general rule, we have key areas in the sort of in Lochaber that potentially could be deemed, and have been for a long time, been marked as areas that we need to be aware of, the potential for terrorist threats, like ferry ports, and other sort of areas of industrial, key sort of industrial areas like the British Alcan, aluminium smelter and things like that. But we don't have any significant events to report that have occurred. So sorry for a little bit of the long-winded. I'll now put it over to you, Chair, and if there's any questions to ask about that report or any other local implications of things that are linked to it.
Great, thank you, Nick. Thank you for going through the report. Thank you for pulling out. I think there's some key figures there that you highlighted around drug seizures and traffic offences. Just before I turn to questions, you mentioned Operation Close Pass, and you were doubtful whether that had happened in Lochaber. I know for a fact it has happened. I think it was your colleague Sean Knox who organised it. It would be great to see it happen again. It was done as a result of complaints from commuters on the A830, and it was done. The force did a really good job working with BSW at the sawmill, because a number of the complaints were to do with timber lorries. But I think it was really successful. It was probably 2 or 3 years ago now it was done. So I'm sure if you want to get in touch with BSW, they would probably look to do something similar again. Okay, I'll just turn to questions. Dennis, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in with a point or question, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Nick, for your report. Can I just draw attention to one particular thing, which is on page 5 of our electronic copies, but maybe page 3 of yours. It's to do with, under serious and organised crime, it's to do with the ongoing investigation to recent online electronic frauds, which have targeted local businesses and charities and have resulted in the loss of substantial amounts of money. The reason I bring this up is because it's awful easy for some members of the community to be successfully targeted here. If you're elderly and trusting, you probably don't realise something is a scam. In your inbox, Nick, from Friday or so, you will have seen an email from me where somebody purporting to be me contacted somebody in the small aisles and asked them to buy Amazon gift cards for me. This was a complete scam. I knew nothing about it until it was forwarded to me. We got through the first hurdle in the sense that they weren't picked up straight away. But the reason that I mention this is, although you use the press and have successfully used the press in the past, I wonder if there's something more we can do by way of a sort of PR campaign in the local press, and also, of course, in the local newsletters. I mean, you've got West Word in the west of Parish, you've got the Kilmallie newsletter. I think Chair Doll's back up and running again. I'm sure there'll be a number of others. Basically, instead of having just sort of some general points about electronic fraud, perhaps some specific ones, such as check the email address, so that people go beyond that first sort of impression and actually look to see at some of the detail, and perhaps give some examples of frauds which you have come across, which could maybe serve as a warning to others. It's just that I'm aware of the fact that in the modern world, we can do very little about it. But if we can forewarn people, that will maybe help people have a little bit more confidence in how to cope with something like that. Otherwise, many thanks for your report. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Dennis. I don't see anybody else with their hands up, so I'll go back to you, Nick. Do you want to respond to Dennis's point?
Yeah, absolutely. First thing is, thank you, Dennis, for picking up. I skipped over that, and I had actually written a note against that. And I think the first bit to reiterate is that the origin of these crimes are almost like 99% non-local, unfortunately. So we investigate them as best we can, and depending on the scale of the fraud, they are reported to Action Fraud, who are a large group who sort of cover the whole of the UK in terms of their action towards this. And the CID will report and investigate significant frauds, which amount to large monetary value, should we say. So, but regardless of the investigation process, 99% of them come back as being non-local originated fraud via the sort of electronic process, and they have origins in, unfortunately, places which are completely out with the UK, and they sort of, as you say, Dennis, completely prey on vulnerable people who, should we say, it is becoming so complicated now in terms of the fact that now people can, a few years ago, it was limited to people sort of receiving emails which had dodgy links, and now you can get text messages because all the smartphones are basically internet enabled. You can get text messages and other types of calls which you ask people to do weird and wonderful things, say they're due a refund, or there have been several of the police officers who've recently been caught out by fraud. There was another one which you mentioned which was a post office type fraud where you had a link to a perfectly reasonable genuine post office page, or that's what it looked like, to show that you needed to pay some money to have something delivered because it hadn't been, the proper amount hadn't been paid, and that was, multiple people were actually caught out by that. So I completely agree that there could be some local interaction, should we say, in terms of how we sort of warn people. And what I'll do is I'll take a note of that just now. I will ask my representatives in the community for the community councils to make specific reference to this, their next input, and actually try to liaise with them to have something put out. I'm quite sure that if I look, our preventions and interventions team at a national level and a divisional level will have already had some sort of advice that's available to people, and we will try to sort of pursue that and try to help the more vulnerable people in the community. And completely understand what you say about the things like looking at the email address and looking at that, and the thing is they're sort of so complex and almost so good now that sometimes only the most savvy people sort of are the ones who don't get caught out, or people like me who literally, unless I recognize the person that I've received a message from, I just delete them because I'm quite sure that they'll get back in touch with me if there's a big problem. But point taken, and I'll take a note of that, and I'll give you an update next time we talk, Dennis, about the involvement. But I see that as something that I could get my community council led sergeants who are involved with them to interact with specifically, and then take things forward in that respect. Does that sound okay?
Great, thank you, Nick. Really appreciate your response there. I don't see any other hands up for questions from members, so I'll just say thank you very much, Nick, for bringing your paper to us today. It was really informative, a lot of information. You brought out a lot of detail, so thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again at, I think it's approximately 6 months' time, isn't it, next time? Members, that's item 3 on our agenda complete. I see our regular chair, Councillor Baxter, has joined us, so I'll hand over to him. Thank you again, Nick. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, and apologies to colleagues for the IT difficulties that I've had this morning connecting, but I'm here now, fortunately, and we're moving to item 40, which is an update on Fort William 2040. No report for this, but it's a presentation that's going to be led by Karen McDermott, our Executive Chief Officer for Communities in Place, and I believe she's supported by her fellow ECO, Malcolm MacLeod, but there are other partners joining us for this. So I've already seen Neil McRae from Hightrans. I can see Alistair Nicholson from HIE and Louise Bussell from NHS Highland. I'm not sure whether we have anyone from Transport Scotland, either Fiona or David, but you're very welcome if you are there. And I believe Fraser Copeland, I assume, is joining us from the Lochaber Chamber of Commerce. Very good to see you as well, Fraser. My apologies if I've missed anyone off. I've just seen Scott Delgado, who did a lot of the groundwork initially putting together Fort William 2040 and the various workshops that we had. So he is also joining us. So over to Karen.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. Just to say, Chair, we have Amy Phillips and David Devine, who are here from Transport Scotland, and they'll be presenting some information too. And also to introduce you to Penny Coles. Penny is a new employee with Crown Estate Scotland, and she's joined us as well, and we'll be referring to that shortly. Now, if you bear with me, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to work the slides, so I'll just introduce the speaker when it comes to their slide, if that's okay. And I'll probably lose sight of everyone, so apologies for that, and I'll see if I can do this slickly. So can anyone confirm if they can see the presentation all right, please?
Yep, that's fine.
Great. Okay. I'll just put that onto the main slide. Here we are. So members, it's an update. It's over a year since there was a presentation to the committee, and thank you very much for giving us space today to give you an update on what we've been working on over the last 16 months or so. As you know, it's been very busy and disrupted time for everyone, but I do believe we have made some progress. So what we'd like to cover today is I've got a description of how we've been resetting the Officer Partnership Board for Fort William 2040. Alistair Nicholson's going to give you an update on the achievements since the last time we came to the committee, and that will include a number of contributions from various public bodies and private business. And Louise Bussell's here to give you an update on the hospital reprovisioning. And we have Neil McRae, who's going to start off the transport update, followed by Amy and David from Transport Scotland. And then a summary of our current issues that we're grappling with within the board, but also the opportunities that exist. And Malcolm MacLeod will then provide an update on the Levelling Up Fund bid development and an opportunity for us to answer any questions you have. So we also have, as you've said, Chair Fraser Copeland from the Chamber of Commerce, Penny Coles from Crown Estate Scotland, Dot, of course, the ward manager, Dot Ferguson, who's been keeping the board apprised of all the place-based investment decisions you've been making, and Scott Delgarno, who's been with the project since the beginning. Just to give you an update on how the partnership board at an officer level has been reset and is functioning at the moment. The last time there was a presentation to the committee, the board involved the council, HIE, Hightrans, Transport Scotland and civil servants from the built environment section within the Scottish Government. The board has since been extended, now includes NHS Highland, Lochaber Chamber of Commerce and Crown Estate Scotland. And of course, it's not an exclusive board. If there are others who have got contributions to make or voices that we need to hear, they'd be very welcome to be part of the board as well. So a range of the logos there on the slide for your information. The board meets quarterly and it has an agreed remit. And we agreed at a previous board meeting that at an officer level, the chair would rotate annually. So at the moment I'm chairing the board and that will change later towards the end of this year. And our real focus, of course, is on demonstrating the place principle. Important aspect of that is making sure that all public bodies coordinate their activity and investment so that we can focus on the place and the development of Fort William. We're very alert to the fact that the really good work that started on community involvement needs to be picked up again, and we'll come back to that later on in the presentation. So more recently, we created a transport subgroup, really because transport is so critical to the development of Fort William. And Neil McRae has very helpfully agreed to chair that subgroup, and he'll give you an update of the subgroup's work so far. We've had a very kind and generous offer from Crown Estate Scotland to provide some funding for a dedicated officer to support the work of the board. So we're currently on the trawl for match funding for that. And HIE funded some consultancy work to help us reflect on how we're performing as a board. And the good news from that is it did evidence a commitment from the board members to realise the ambition of Fort William 2040, and helpfully it pointed out some key actions for us. So the key things for us to pick up are building on the communications plan, working with members on a lobbying strategy where that's appropriate, and also really for us all to stick at building trusting relationships across the partnership and getting to know each other a bit better so that we can work more easily together. And also have some honest conversations about where things are likely to be or are difficult. I'm going to hand over to Alistair now and he'll run through the next two slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I'll just give a quick canter through some of the progress that's been made over the last 12 to 18 months. Firstly, phases 1 and 2 of the Thomas Telford Marina are complete, really transforming that site and helping, as set out in our master plan, to turn the town round to face the water. Fundraising efforts by the community are ongoing to finance phase 3, the final phase of that particular project. On the full fibre, High has approved £50,000 towards the cost of taking the Highland Council-led full fibre project across the canal. Now, initially, this brings Banavie Primary School into the programme, but it also provides new infrastructure within reach of many more businesses and communities in Banavie and Corpach. Moving around the coast, the £11 million flood defences scheme for Cool and Lochie side is now underway, and this will accommodate an active travel link between the canal and the Soldiers Bridge. And again, there'll be ramped access to the beach, which also helps meet our 2040 aspirations. Continuing with the active travel network, the Spaces for People project at Black Parks is now a safe off-road link, taking the connections on round from Soldiers Bridge and round to Inverlochie. On Blarmore, we've been working with Zero Waste Scotland, along with local partners, to complete a study looking at how to go about developing a low carbon district heating scheme. So we've got that options appraisal undertaken now. More work is going to be needed, and collaboration will be essential if we're to be able to deliver a project there. But we've got the first steps there. We've got the partnership together, and we've had some input from the expertise of Zero Waste Scotland. Within West Highland College, I think probably the main news there is that their advanced manufacturing centre will be operationed in just a couple of weeks. This project will provide small and medium-sized businesses with free access to advanced manufacturing equipment, technical support and training. Now, this is a project that will serve the Highlands and Islands as a whole, but it's based in Fort William. The expertise will be here, and the core equipment will be here, albeit there'll be a mobile element to it that will travel around the region. And this project linked directly to the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland in Shinnon. So again, a real link into world-class expertise there that we can draw on to support business development in the area. Can you skip to the next slide, please, Karen? Thank you. Housing investment continues at a pace around the town. Tangible progress can be seen at Blarmore, where the council's building 117 houses. 38 houses are complete now at the site of the former Upper Achintore Primary School site, and work is underway to convert Fulton House and Lochaber House into letting units. And finally, I think 4 private sector developments worth noting. Was a fantastic new cinema in Cameron Square. The old BA Club's been replaced by the Highland Soap Company's facility, again linked into the active travel routes I spoke about earlier. Forest Holidays have planning permission for their 50 holiday cabins in Leakin Forest, and Alvans have submitted a planning application to develop the smelter into a recycling centre and billet plant. So it's a considerable amount of development has taken place, despite the difficulties of the past year to 18 months, and there are plenty of projects working their way through the pipeline at the moment, and we'll come on to talk about 1 or 2 of those. I think that's all from me, Karen, as that sort of potted update, and we'll pass back to you for the next stage of the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Alistair. So we're going to invite Louise in next to give you an update on the hospital development.
Super, thank you. I've put a bit of context there, but I'm sure people are already very well aware of the context for the hospital. So obviously the Belford is one of 3 rural general hospitals in Highland, and it's been open for a long time, since 1965, although part of it is slightly newer than that. So clearly it's getting to the point of needing, or is maybe even past the point of needing replacement. So there's a real desire to get this project moving forward. I think it's fair to say that this has been on the table for a long time, but the momentum's really going now to get this where it needs to be. So the first stage of the 3-part business case to replace Belford is being developed at the moment, which is the initial agreement that we're planning to put into the Scottish Government by November. We've already started the workshops and a lot of the planning work in order to get that initial agreement completed. There's more this week on that one. And we're hoping that will be approved by the Scottish Government, so we can allow this design work to start. Clearly, it is something that is very high on the Scottish Government agenda, because it was one of the only schemes to be identified in the recent election. So we're really hopeful that we're going to move this one on. We are now putting out regular updates with a newsletter so that people in the community and the wider group can see what's happening, as well as continuing to have a stakeholder group, which was originally the steering group, but it's now a stakeholder group so that we can keep people updated. Next slide, please.
Sorry, my computer's a bit sticky. Bear with me, Louise.
That's okay. If it's just sticky, I've got my presentation there anyway, so I could carry on, but that's fine. Okay, so it's also worth just identifying that in order to drive this forward, we've put in a new governance structure. So we've got a programme board, we've got a project team, and as I mentioned, the stakeholder group. We're also going to be having work streams looking at specific aspects of this. The clinical teams have held a workshop with the community, and 14 of the teams presented their vision for the new hospital. Clearly there's more than 14 teams, so we will be continuing to have those types of presentations and dialogue, and we're just in the process of responding to a number of questions that came from that presentation. We've got a new communication and engagement plan, and that's very much about us trying to reach groups that aren't necessarily as engaged already through the stakeholder group. So that's going out and getting involved with a number of different community groups, and we're more than happy to do that with any suggestions of areas that we've missed within that. The newsletter will form part of this strategy, but also we're looking at any way that we can get in there to get people's views and perspectives. Clearly at the moment the real focus is in getting the IA resolved and out of the way, if you like, but the next step is also to look at the wider Lochaber requirements for health and social care. So the hospital is our focus at this minute, but we're not losing sight of what the wider pathways need to be within the system. So the group will be taking that forward at a later date.
Thank you, Louise. And we're going to go on to transport now. So I'll ask Neil if he'd like to come in and join us, and I'll keep trying to get the slides to move.
Good morning, members. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, thanks, Karen. And as Karen's explained, I think we've established rather a transport subgroup, which reflects the importance of transport to all aspects of the 2040 delivery programme, and I suppose reflects also the absence of such a kind of key stakeholder forum, both in the back of COVID, but since the Fort William Stag was completed in 2018. So we've met a couple of times, and it's been a good opportunity for all the stakeholders that you can see listed there to communicate on the good ongoing work that there's been both at a local and strategic level on transport front. So I'll just summarise some of them, but also to add that I think to ensure that we better link into business as well, Fraser has joined the group, and the next meeting of that will be just next week before the next programme board. In terms of the actual projects, you can see there, just going through them by mode. With active travel, there's been a lot of good progress recently, as Alistair touched upon. Establishment of a master plan and action group chaired by Councillor Thompson, and the various different projects there, including the e-bike hire scheme, which wasn't touched upon, but has been led by Lochaber Environment Group. Bus Partnership Fund, we've had applications to the Scottish Government's Bus Partnership Fund successful in Inverness and also in Fort William. They are to the tune of 700,000, and that will lead to the delivery, hopefully in the next 18 months, of 2 new bus-only links that will improve bus access at Upper Achintoa, but also at Bladmore, with links between the new residential development there and the medical centre, but obviously all the new hospital hopefully in time too. But on top of that, there's also an additional sum of funding to look at wider benefits that will hopefully can realise bus priority on the trunk road network. So it's looking at everything from potential bus priority measures on the 82 itself to the Cars Corner park and ride, and how that might be, how the priority could be delivered between there and into the centre of town and elsewhere, to encourage more people to leave their car at the edge of Fort William and use bus, but also to encourage encourage more locals to use it as well. And you'll see the last bullet there under bus, Smart Choices, Smart Places funding. We've used that government funding stream administered by Paths for All. Highland Council has used it to support a service to Glen Nevis this summer, but also we're going to implement reduced bus fares across the Lochaber network later in the year, and that will hopefully be a great opportunity to get people now back to using public transport, and maybe those who haven't used it before when it's safe to do so. On top of that, we've also, a colleague of mine, Frank Roach, has commissioned a small technical rail study that looks at opportunities to improve the rail timetable. Members will be aware of the improvements achieved at Oban, where there's now 6 or 7 services a day, and also one of those is taking a huge number of school children into Oban High School. Can we do something similar in Fort William? And also, can we improve integration with freight? So it's looking at connections at Corpach and that, and seeing what is possible. And then finally, on the low carbon front, members will be aware, obviously, of the rapid expanse of EV charging at Aird, with Tesla charging and other rapid and fast chargers going in there to create a real hub. And there's additional funding for that in the pipeline. So these are some of the improvements led by local partners, but we've also got Amy and David to speak about some of the measures in the strategic transport network. So I'll hand over to them.
Thanks, Amy or David, whoever would like to come in next on this slide. Thank you.
Hi, I'll come in on the traffic signal trial at Nevis Roundabout, which was carried out this summer. As you're probably aware, we had a trial this summer. It was from the 5th to the 19th of July, and it was at Nevis Bridge Roundabout. The trial was an attempt to address the delays that are experienced from southbound traffic on the 82 driving through Fort William. It was identified a key issue at the roundabout is vehicles hesitating, southbound vehicles hesitating as they approach the roundabout, even though they have right of way, and there's the flow of traffic is such that it tends to be in the main north to south, but there's a natural hesitancy, and it was felt that we should run a trial with a temporary traffic signal located south of the roundabout for northbound traffic, approximately 60 metres south of the roundabout. This traffic light would periodically hold northbound traffic just for an instant, and that would allow, well, the plan was that would allow the hesitancy issue for southbound traffic approaching the roundabout to be addressed. We hope to a large degree, but the outcome, I'm sorry to advise, of the trial, we don't have a full report yet, but it's looking that the hesitancy issue is still an issue, and traffic are still, to a large degree, they have, especially visiting traffic, even though they've got a clear run through the roundabout, they are still slowing up and having that brief moment of being static at the roundabout just for a split second, but it's enough of an issue to cause a build-up of traffic and a congestion that has been experienced. So as things stand, I've really got the bad news to say that the trial has not been successful in reaching the objectives we were looking for. Amy and I have a meeting with Jacobs actually Wednesday this week when we'll get a more detailed report. But effectively, the single traffic light, which was, as I say, approximately 60 metres south of the roundabout for northbound traffic, it was a precursor to get some indication of how well traffic lights may or may not work should that be deployed in the roundabout. But what we have learned from the trial, not just with traffic light issues, but there's geometry issues on the bridge, the Nevis Bridge over the river, which, as you'll probably know, is a listed structure, but it's a particularly narrow bridge. And during the trial, there were particular issues observed with two HGVs can't really safely cross, so one gives way to the other, so there's freight on the road that also holds up traffic. So I'm afraid the issue with Nevis Roundabout and the congestion issues remain an issue, and to some extent it's, you know, we're going back to the drawing board, as it were, and we're having a meeting with Jacobs on Wednesday this week, to a wash-up meeting, and also talk about future plans or future proposals for going forward. But basically to say, I'm sorry to say that the trial has not been successful. It hasn't reached the objectives we were looking for. Happy to take questions at this juncture, or do you want them later on?
Maybe do questions later on, David. Thank you. Amy, do you want to cover the long-term plans, please?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yes, just to say that I'm sure you'll recall that that we're undertaking the second strategic transport projects review. So just a reminder that will inform transport investment in Scotland for the next 20 years. So it's a Scotland-wide review looking at the strategic transport network, and it's across a number of modes, so walking, wheeling, cycling, bus, rail, car, as well as looking at wider island and rural connectivity issues. So STPR2 is to deliver, well, one of many actions being undertaken by Transport Scotland, Scottish Government and others to deliver the second National Transport Strategy. And we're also looking to line it with other national plans like the Infrastructure Investment Plan and more critically the fourth National Planning Framework, as well as the Climate Change Plan. So it's an evidence-based review, as I said, looking at the performance across all modes in terms of the strategic network. So in February, we reported phase one. So due to COVID, we are reporting in two phases, just because Transport Scotland, along with a number of other Scottish Government colleagues, were fully concentrated on the COVID response. So to make sure that we could report some early steps and early progress, we published in February for consultation sort of the first projects, and those ones were identified that could significantly contribute to our objectives for STPR2, but also the National Transport Strategy, that can be delivered or significantly progressed in the shorter term and perform well against COVID recovery priorities. So included within that was, you know, the bus partnership funding, which Neil alluded to earlier, and then also actually making any successful spaces for people measures to permanent. So significant sort of active travel funding, as well as others, but I'll leave it you to peruse on the website as you will. In terms of sort of longer term, more substantial projects such as the Fort William bypass and others, they're being looked at in our phase two, our second phase. So we're engaging with officers from Highland Council through our regional transport working group, and the next meeting that we have for the Highlands and Islands region is on the 24th of August. So that's chaired by Neil's colleague Ranald at Hightrans. And involves officers from a number of councils, but also Highland, as I said. So we're looking to launch a public consultation on the sort of draft 20-year investment plan. So that's the outcomes of STPR2 towards the end of this year. So that will include not only the recommendations, but also the statutory assessments, including strategic environmental assessment and other assessments. So that's really the next step. And I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amy. So moving on, if I can, just to cover some of the current opportunities and issues which the board is considering. 5 issues identified so far, and really the first is if we can try and secure match funding to help, give us some dedicated programme support. Particularly around the ability to restart community engagement, but also to try and support the board better and to make the connections more easy across the different partners, as well as looking at new development opportunities. You've heard from Amy the timeline around SPR2 and also from David on the Nevis Roundabout challenges, which still exist. So there are enduring transport constraints, which they're kind of the key to unlocking a lot of the other developments that are within the Fort William 2040 programme. I think too, an observation in some of the conversations we've had on the board is that it's very much public infrastructure led, and that in the area there is generally a lack of private sector speculative development other than the projects which Alistair had mentioned in his presentation. But for example, around housing, that's been very much public intervention there to make that happen. And I know members, you're well versed in the land development constraints which exist in and around Fort William, and those are difficult not just for the Fort William 2040 programme, but also for other mainstream services, for example, extending the burial ground and looking for new opportunities there. So moving on to the opportunities. More opportunities, which is always really positive. I would say that having been involved in the board for just over a year, I can see how that partnership is evolving very constructively. Our relationships are extending and they're deepening, and the more time we spend together, the better that kind of nurturing approach to the partnership works. It's super news to have Crown Estate Scotland as part of the board, and also with scope for either ourselves or HIE to offer a working base for Penny and Crown Estate Scotland. So we're working on that just now. As I said before, we're looking for match funding to the Crown Estate offer. And if members have any insights on that, it'd be great to hear that too. And we are working together much better, I think, on the place principle. And it was interesting that at the end of last year, the government announced its place-based investment programme. So we're still to see how that might pan out over this next year or two. And as Louise mentioned, the Belford Hospital commitment in the manifesto, it's all very positive. And of course, you'll know we've got the World Championships for cycling the next couple of years, and a real opportunity to showcase Lochaber again to a wide and global audience. I suppose reflecting too on the impacts and outcome of COVID, there's definitely been an interest in more people leaving urban areas, moving to rural Scotland. Some of that can be a bit bittersweet, I suppose, members, with positive and plus points and minus points, but nevertheless having an impact locally. The board's also had a very interesting presentation from a member of staff in Malcolm's service on community wealth building, and it's made us reflect on the need for us to think about who benefits from the developments within the programme, and understanding that better can help us prioritise and target our efforts. And we're very keen to establish linkages with the Community Planning Partnership, so we'll be working on that over the next few months. And of course, it'll be really grateful to have members' feedback and your views and your insights and any offers of support, as well as scrutiny of the work we're doing at some challenge. And a really other opportunity is around the Levelling Up Fund. So I'm going to bring Malcolm in to give you an update on how that's progressing.
Morning, members. So in terms of Levelling Up Fund, as you know, there will be another round of bids being submitted. The focus remains very much on a Fort William Portree joint bid, focused on regeneration. A lot of work's been happening around Portree Harbour, for example, and we're working that up. And similarly in Fort William, we are engaging with colleagues and partners. I think the holidays have impacted on progress. There's been a lot of people have had some well-earned leave, but now we are gearing up to getting a bid in, and as before, an external advisor will be brought in to formulate the bid and do the kind of the work required in terms of the application process. The timescales remain unclear. We haven't heard anything about our round one bids yet, and neither for the Levelling Up Fund or the Community Renewal Fund. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date as soon as we hear anything. I have, when I returned from leave today, had an email for a meeting with the Under Secretary of State for Scotland on the 13th September, which is looking for feedback on round one, and I'm guessing will inform where we are on round two. And clearly in Fort William, the focus is still around the Linney Leisure site, potentially looking at linked projects if we can, bearing in mind we are constrained by a 20 million ceiling on the bid. So we're looking at all of the others that have previously been discussed with you, whether that's around the Corpac Marina, whether it's around any of the other projects that have come forward as to yourselves, members, as part of the various funding streams that have come in previously. And clearly, I'm very happy to come and speak to you separately on that process as we move forward over the next few weeks. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. So the next slide is just really the question slide, members, but perhaps if I stop sharing the screen, we'll be able to see each other, if that's okay.
Thank you, Karen. And whilst you're doing that, thank you for a very comprehensive report, which I'm sure will be much appreciated by our colleagues, certainly appreciated by me, who admittedly was initially on previous reports sceptical that we would see any significant move forward, and that this was simply another report that would lay on a council's bookshelf and not see any progress. So to see the progress so far is heartening. I'm particularly encouraged that Transport Scotland are with us today with an update with some of the issues there, which will be appreciated as well. I think the easiest way to structure questions and discussions, rather than have a free for all, as there were several elements of that presentation, is to deal with it in sections, so that we are going to particular partners for any questions. So first of all, colleagues, are there any questions on the area of governance that Karen outlined at the beginning of her presentation? We'll deal with any questions relating to that first of all. Dennis, you have your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my apologies for a couple of belated declarations of interest. It's only that when I saw the words housing development, and equally well Neil mentioned the word leg, I recognise that I have to make two non-financial declarations here, please. One, in the context of housing development, as the Highland Council nominee to the Lochaber Housing Association, and secondly, as the Highland Council nominee to the Lochaber Environmental Group, in the context that Neil has already advised us of in environmental connections. But in neither case will these prevent me from taking part in the discussion. I've no real issues to raise, Chair, about the governance issues, but I would like to return, if I may, with questions about some of the particular topics that were discussed thereafter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, much appreciated, Councillor Rickson. So can we move on then to dealing with any NHS issues, particularly around Balford and the progress that is being made on that? I suspect, Councillor Rickson, yes, I anticipated that you might have a question on this. Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair, for your forbearance. Yes, a couple of questions, please. Firstly, Louise, I know you've heard it, plenty of it in the context of our sort of local steering groups and so on. It's the issue of the road link between the health centre and the hospital. Now, I fully understand that this is not an NHS responsibility, but you will be well aware from the number of times it's been raised, it is a matter of significant local concern, and members of the public, if they were here, would certainly be hammering on the desk about it. So can I flag this up to everybody else, please? I know Alan Maguire has, I understand, left a space, so to speak, for this to happen. But the danger is that unless we really grapple with this straight away, we will have people coming out of the health centre, going back on the A830, driving a few hundred yards on the A830, and then turning off it again to go into the hospital. And that really doesn't make sense. So the first thing is, can we make sure that that's covered as we move forward, please? And I do understand, Louise, the NHS is not in the business of building roads, but we have to make sure this all comes together. The second thing is about district heating systems. I noticed with pleasure that you have advertised this as being a possibility. We brought a motion to Highland Council, probably the best part of 2 years ago now, asking that we look at district heating systems, particularly in the context of Lochaber. A report is supposed to come back to Highland Council from within Highland Council about this issue. I hugely welcome this being on the table, and I do hope you will be able to share the results of your feasibility study with us soon. The reason for my interest is partly the environmental one, but the second thing is the Scottish Government announced a couple of years ago now a competitive challenge fund where it will offer up to 50% of the district heating system costs. Now, it is not for me to say what's technically possible. I fully expect officers to have far more knowledge about what can be done. But if ever there was a site that seemed to lend itself to district heating systems, this seems to be it. It's the biggest area of flat land in Lochaber, and it will have what the Scottish Government refer to as anchor building. In fact, it may have 2 anchor buildings. The Scottish Government in that outline plan suggests the importance of an anchor building such as a hospital. In this case, it may have both a hospital and also a STEM centre, which would serve as anchors for a district heating system. So can I say that this is hugely important, not just in the context of a real plus for Lochaber, but also in terms of achieving our environmental goals. Chair, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Vixen. Are there any other NHS-related questions directed for Louise? I don't think there's any indication of that. So, Louise, are you able to respond to this question of the road, recognising what Councillor Vixen says about that you're not in the business of building roads, understandably?
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly it has been a topic of conversation, as Dennis and I know from our stakeholder group. Alan Wilson, who's our relatively new because he's not new anymore, Director of Estates and Facilities, is taking that on board and having the relevant conversations, and will feed back to that group and indeed this group.
Thank you. And if Councillor Rickson's happy, I'll leave the district heating system and any response from our officers until a bit towards the end of our discussion. Thank you. Moving on to transport, so covered by both Neil from Hightrans and Amy and David from Transport Scotland. I'm sure there might be some questions about this. I will start on this occasion. So first of all, this is directed to Neil. In terms of the discussion on Transport Hub, and maybe this is being considered, but I don't think it was reflected upon the slides, that when we are talking about active travel, and particularly the work with bus links that was discussed, what work is being done to look at the regeneration of our actual Transport Hub in Fort William, the bus station and the rail station. I'm particularly mindful of this as colleagues in Inverness are spending a lot of time and money at redeveloping the bus station in the centre of Inverness there, and that particular area, improving links. And I would say that many people think that Fort William is in desperate need of a redevelopment of that a particular area, which is, I would say, not particularly welcoming to visitors coming to the area. The links to the town centre, understandably, are difficult but are poor. And with the removal of Visit Scotland from that particular complex to the high street, understanding their reasons for being that, actually information for visitors stepping off a bus or a coach from Glasgow or Inverness for the very first time, or stepping off a train from the south, are now non-existent, and we have an opportunity to address that in any potential future redevelopment of that transport hub. So maybe Neil can deal with that in a moment. And moving on to Transport Scotland, and the recent traffic signal study that's been undertaken. I think this is possibly a problem of dealing with online meetings. So I don't think this was intentional from David, but the tone, David, of your contribution almost suggested that the problem with natural hesitancy of drivers heading southbound and the geometry problems on Nevis Bridge was a revelation. I'm sure that you weren't suggesting that, because I'm mindful of my former colleague Brian Murphy, who constantly in the previous council was on about the problems at the roundabout and people heading southbound. And in fact, Transport Scotland introduced the filter lanes there as an attempt in addressing that problem, which quite obviously hasn't in its entirety. But I was also, you were talking about future plans for trying to address this problem in the longer term. Can you give us any timescale as to that? Because certainly in the 9 years that I've been a councillor, this has been an active issue for Fort William, and time moves on. And I would say that it underlines the importance of an alternative road through the town, a link road. I noticed Amy referred to it as a bypass. We prefer the use of a link road rather than a bypass. But if it's now a bypass, that maybe suggests that that's an opportunity for Transport Scotland and the Scottish Government to fund the bypass of the town. But I suspect that's a political argument that we'll be having for many years yet. I see Councillor Thompson, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Rickson.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Andrew. I think I agree with the points that you made there, particularly about the transport centre. I definitely echo those. I also have a question about Nevis Bridge. I'll just focus on that. David, thanks for the description of the trial. Andrew asked you a question about time frame. Can I ask you just directly, given the failure of the trial, what alternative interventions are you considering? I can think there's only one left on the table, and that is to remove the roundabout and replace it with a straight through road and a filter lane leading to Glen Nevis. It's my understanding that's the only option now left on the table. It would be good if you could confirm that that is the case. And Andrew made a point there about the use of the word bypass. I think that's a good point. I think it's a realignment of the A82. I think bypass is a misleading word for what the impact would have on the town. I think realignment is the way I'd like to describe it. Thank you.
Okay.
David,
yeah.
before you come in, can I just deal with Councillor Rickson, because he may have related questions to this, which will save you time in responding. Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, indeed. Two things I was going to bring up in the context of transport. One, Neil, you talked about EV charging. I think this is hugely important, because what struck me is that even in our lifetimes, we have seen the very rapid changeover of technology. Film cameras were here for a long time. There was a slow build up to digital, and then film collapsed overnight. I strongly suspect something will happen with the change from fuel and diesel to electric cars, that there will be a slow build up, and then the whole system will change very, very quickly. And we have to be prepared with EV charging points. The second thing is in connection with whether we call it a bypass or road realignment. I noticed there was no mention of the Corrie Glass scheme in any of your transport suggestions. I don't think you could ignore it going forward. This is one of the biggest civil engineering projects likely to take place in Scotland for many, many years to come. It is beginning to move forward again now. Now, on the basis of their own figures, I did some calculations a couple of years ago when it was brought to Highland Council Planning. To give you an idea of their own worst-case figures of rock extraction, they would be taking out 4,200 tonnes of rock every day for 915 days. 3,000 tonnes of that would go by barge through the canal. Now, the point is the A830 is extremely fragile. There's one road, one railway, one canal. If the canal is up, everything else stops. So the point being that you cannot think about our transport network without thinking about the fragility of this, both in terms of road traffic accidents. So for instance, in 2019, I think it was, the A30 was closed for something like 10 hours completely one day, and we were wholly dependent on the Corran ferry to get people out to the west, but also this big civil engineering project, which is in the prospect for the future. So can we think, please, about fragility? We are not capable of withstanding shocks to our system. Those shocks could be accidents. I noticed we've had a road slip, landslips recently at Highland, and I noticed one just off the road at Mora here at the bypass. So we have accidents anyway, but we also have big projects coming up, and we also have a lot of traffic in the summertime. So could we please, when we're talking about transport and Fort William 2040, also factor in these elements? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rickson. Your last point on fragility is one I think where your Ward 21 colleagues will share, as there's been a number of accidents south of Fort William on the A82, and one again recently on the hottest day of the year, where the road was shut for a significant amount of time, so much so that the council were looking to deliver water to individual cars and things like that. And so it is a continuous problem, which I'm sure Transport Scotland are very well aware of, and active with discussions with partners about that, particularly our colleagues in Police Scotland. So a couple of questions about the A82 or the trunk road network, particularly focusing on Fort William there. If we can ask David to respond to those first, and then I'll go to Neil to deal with the other transport issues that were raised.
Thank you, Andrew. Your first point, were the difficulties at Nevis Roundabout a revelation to me? No. I've been involved with this side of things in the northwest Highland area for 5 years, 5-6 years or so, and I've been working particularly with Ben at Nevis Roundabout. We did have phase 1 in 2017, 18, and that didn't really achieve what we wanted. It wasn't, my disappointment was there was quite a lot running with the traffic light trial. There was a lot of hope that that would provide some benefit, and it hasn't. So it's not revelation, it's disappointment, but my disappointment will be nothing compared to yourselves who actually physically have to live in the area on a day-to-day basis. On Ben's point, removal of the roundabout, again, having been involved with discussions with the group, I believe that was first mooted and mentioned by Highland Council when they were still in charge of the trunk road way back, I think, back 1999, I think it was raised. And certainly to remove the roundabout would obviously most likely improve the flow of traffic on 82 north and southbound. But the impact on Nevis Road and the Nevis Retail Centre, I don't think it's been occupied at the moment with the woolen mill situation. I might be wrong with that. But certainly from the trial, one of the key areas is as the roundabout exists, it's very difficult for people to particularly get on to the 82 at that location. And if we remove the roundabout, it'd be even more difficult for them to get onto the 82. But that aside, obviously big questions have been raised. Where next? What do we do now? And I've got to say that I don't have that answer. And it's a big question that has been asked for a long time now. I know I don't know if it was Ben or Andrew or one of the other councillors mentioned, you know, bypass or link road or whichever the term has been used. But these are big strategic questions. They are STPR2 type questions, and I'm not in a position to answer that. I'm not qualified to answer that. But on regards to moving forward, the roundabout trial has recently been completed, and we will have to take stock, we will have to regroup, and we will have to get our thinking caps on. And as I say, the first step or the next step is Amy and I are meeting Jacobs, who really led the design this Wednesday, to take stock, to discuss you know, a more detailed response to what happened in regards to the actual trial, and to get our thinking caps on. But it is a very difficult junction. I won't go through it again. You all know how difficult that junction is. The narrowness of the listed structure, which is the bridge. It's a 90-degree almost turn. Everything is difficult. It's difficult footway widths, NMUs. It's a real challenge. And again, just to reiterate, it's not a surprise to me, no, and I'm sorry that I'm very aware of the problems at the roundabout, and I'm very sorry that the trial hasn't reaped any positive outcomes. So that's really all I can say at this juncture, other than we will continue to work with with you and continue to keep you abreast of what progresses from discussions.
Thank you. Could we move across to Neil and the wider transport issues, transport hub, etc.?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the opportunity to improve facilities and links between the interchange and the town centre. In terms of the bus partnership fund, we had to work with the criteria that was available there, and it very much looks at bus priority. However, I'm conscious of what we can do in that space, and if there's anything through this fund and through the appraisal that we've been given funding to carry out to make improvements there, then we certainly will look at it. The one thing that I would add as well is that in terms of the strategic transport projects review, the hub and improvements to the hub there, specifically improvements to Fort William interchange, cycle routes to from, improved ticketing and information facilities, is still in the mix as one of the potential schemes that could be funded through SDPR. So I don't know if Amy can say anything in terms of an update on that. And the last thing that I was just going to say, to add my support to comments that have been made in terms of the fragility, the word that we've been using regularly is, the resilience of the transport network. And I think it's something that keeps coming back, is that it's, regardless of congestion levels at different times, different periods of the day, it's the impact when there is the closure and the lack of the alternative that I think we, as an area, are better articulating, but we need to do so even more in terms of securing that funding for these big investment projects. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Neil. Amy, did you want to respond to that point from?
Yeah, if I may, Chair.
You.
Yeah, it's just to say, just in terms of the naming of the link road, we haven't got any specific views on that, so we can discuss at our next regional transport working group and come up with something that's mutually acceptable. I just in relation to Councillor Rixon's comments, I briefly mentioned that we're assessing a number of options against what we call the transport planning objectives for STPR2, and one of the 5 objectives is a reliable and resilient strategic transport system. So it is very firmly embedded within the objectives of what we're looking to achieve through the review. And yeah, obviously I previously was road safety manager for the area, so I'm acutely aware of just how much disruption it causes communities whenever the road is closed for whatever reason, but particularly so, in Highland, as well as the sort of tragedy to the families involved as well. But yeah, and in terms of interchange, yes, thanks Neil. Just say that is very sort of that's being considered through STPR2, and it does perform pretty well against our objectives as well. So and also our STPR2 is also informed by the sustainable travel investment hierarchies and travel hierarchy. So they're very much about making the most of the existing asset, and then reducing the need to travel unsustainably in the first instance, which is the work that Neil's doing on the transport side, particularly in terms of active travel and other things that are critical to that. So just to flag that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on, can we deal with any questions relating to the wider economic issues and Malcolm McLeod's contributions about the Levelling Up Fund? We'll include that within that. I don't think there is. So finally, can I deal? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rixon, it was a bit too quick.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure whether I've been too quick and maybe anticipated your last question or not. There were 2 things I'm not sure. I think it came up under Malcolm's. One was the business of linking with CPPs. This has come up again and again and again, but there is a huge issue here about resourcing. I noticed in part of the presentation today, you've been talking about resourcing and perhaps dragging in Crown Estate. Obviously, CPPs is a completely separate issue, but unless we are resourced, or unless CPPs are resourced properly, there's a real danger that it won't do the job that they're supposed to do. And I would also point out that the Scottish Government is landing more and more on the role of community planning partnerships with an expectation that they will take on more and more things in the future. So that expectation being there, I think we have to grapple with the issue of how we make them work as well as possible. And the only other thing I would say in Malcolm is that you did say as one of your bullet points that members will be fully advised throughout the process. Can I urge the importance of that we're kept up to date with everything that happens in terms of applications this Levelling Up Fund, please? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Thompson first before we ask for officer response.
Thank you, Chair. The question I had was about housing demand, and I think I'm not sure. There's a number of officers who might be well placed to answer it, but in the original, when we started working on the Fort William 2040 process, clearly the big housing pressure anticipated was the wheel manufacturing plant, which obviously is not now going ahead. But in those discussions, there was a kind of a clear number being talked about in terms of extra housing demand. Now we're facing a different pressure, which is houses transferring to the short-term letting market. We hear anecdotally from employers about significant pressure for their staff trying to find housing, but I don't have a feeling that we know the full scale of the impact. So the question really is, are we monitoring that impact on the local housing market? Because the only hard numbers I'm aware of is the council's or the Highland Housing Register waiting list, but I don't think that captures the loss of housing. So I would like to be reassured that we do have good data on which to base our house building programme. I get the feeling that we're not building enough, but perhaps some of the officers could reassure me that we are building up a clearer picture of the housing need. Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of questions there. Karen's probably best positioned to deal with Councillor Rixon's point about community planning partnership, and maybe then we could go to Malcolm MacLeod about Councillor Thompson's question about housing there. And I still think I'm not sure who can answer Councillor Rixon's earlier question about district heating system in the Blarmore site. Maybe that's something that Malcolm can also deal with. So Karen, first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your questions. Anything that we need to pick up to come back to the committee and standalone reports we can sort out as well. I would say on the community planning side, very keen, Dennis, that we get the right connections there, understand what the officer board is doing for Fort William 2040, how it can complement and work with the community planning board. So we're going to have that on our next agenda, and being chair, I've got that ability just to try and get those connections made. So that'll be helpful. I agree with you around resourcing, but I think we need to be realistic about, there isn't a pot of funding attached to community planning. It's about everyone bending what they do. So I can't give you any assurance that there will be any additional funding for that, but it is about how we work together better and make the links more strong. I think just to say on Ben's question on the housing demand, Malcolm maybe has more information too, but I do know from Alan Maguire that there certainly won't be any difficulty in the new houses that the council's supported the development of, and there'll be no difficulty in finding tenants for those houses. I think, though, Ben, your question was a bigger question about, do we have a sense of how the market is becoming even more distorted post-COVID? And also information we've had from the business community about the difficulty they have in attracting and retaining workers. I don't think yet we have an answer to that, but I'm sure it's part of the council's housing strategy as it develops. But I'll hand over to Malcolm. He might have some more up-to-date information on that.
Malcolm.
Thank you. And I think on the housing front, it's not just the waiting list, it's actually that bigger piece of work we do on an annual basis, a housing need and demand assessment that takes in all sorts of different factors. And so that work is updated very regularly, and allows us to have that kind of based estimates of what the demand is. So I think that's probably where we're best placed. But more importantly than all of that is the actual intelligence that's coming back to us from people like Fraser and his colleagues across the Chambers of Commerce. And one of the really good things that came out of both discussions with HIE and at our Economic Recovery Partnership was the absolute need for a specific piece of work to be done around business needs, and particularly looking at the different types of models. So it's not your traditional affordable housing model, but it's actually because we don't often get these demands coming up within our traditional waiting lists. So there have been a number of discussions following on from that economic recovery partnership. I'm not sure if Fraser's been involved directly, but certainly his colleagues in the Cairngorms have been involved, and Alan's trying to come up with different models that will allow us to react to that particular type of need. In terms of Councillor Rickson's point, yeah, absolutely, I recognise your frustration at the previous time round. As I said, holidays have given a bit of a hiatus, unfortunately, but we'll get back in the seat, the saddle rather, and move forward. And I'd certainly, and I'm sure Alan Maguire will certainly welcome the opportunity of coming to a ward meeting if possible to let you know as regularly as possible. And in terms of district heating, I haven't actually seen the report in detail yet, but I can commit to going away and speaking to colleagues in the climate change and energy team, and certainly get back to all of the members of the area committee and let you know what the plans are, if that's suitable. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I thank you, Malcolm. I see Councillor Rickson nodding his head that's acceptable. Thank you for that. Well, that has been a very useful discussion, and I hope for not just councillors, but also for council officers and the various partners that have joined us today, the feedback that's been received as well. So thank you very much for your time today. It's very much appreciated. So moving on, colleagues, I'm conscious of the fact that we are taking the Corran Ferry agenda item at 12:30 today, where we have community representatives joining us at that stage, as well as the consultants. And I don't want to delay that too long, but I also want to give you an opportunity for a comfort break before we go into that item, which might be quite long. But both Lackey MacDonald and Morrig Cameron have been waiting for some time for their housing report. Do you think we can deal with that in less than 10 minutes to give you a comfort break? Yes, okay. This is a standard report. I have one question on it, if I may, and that is, I understand that when new tenants enter a house, they are giving a survey, or there's some form of survey undertaken by our housing colleagues of new tenants. Can we get an indication of the satisfaction of new tenants entering homes in Lochaber compared to the rest of the Highland Council area? I'm getting a suggestion that it is significantly less than other areas of the council, and that is partly as a result of the condition of our housing stock here in Lochaber when new tenants enter that council stock. And I say this from personal experience, having dealt with a piece of casework recently with someone being offered a house by the council, and they contacted me to say that they were staggered that the council thought that the house at that stage was in a suitable condition for them to move into, and it had been signed off by the council as such. And when I saw it, I too shared the dismay that we thought that this was an acceptable house to move into. I'm getting an indication that this wasn't a one-off case, that there are many other cases of that, and that is actually reflected in the findings of the new tenants survey that I referred to at the beginning of my contribution. So a rather long-winded question, but I thought it needed an explanation. So I don't know who wants to deal with that. Let me just double check first of all if any of my colleagues have any other specific questions on the report. No, I'm getting a negative there. And I'm not sure with either you or either Morrig or Lackey are able to answer that specific question today. But I would certainly appreciate if you aren't able to at a future committee meeting that we actually have a report on the new tenant survey, satisfaction survey for Lochaber, and a comparison to other areas at a future committee if you're unable to give me any indication today. So who wants to take that up? I can see both of you looking horrified that I've thrown that at you. Morag's laughing, and I assume then she's going to answer my question.
I think probably this is a matter for repairs, because when the house is void, the maintenance team deal with it. So it's maybe better that Lackey responds to this if he's prepared to at the moment.
Well, Lackey's popped his hand up, so I'm assuming that he's going to attempt that. Thank you, Lackey.
Okay.
Hi, Andrew. I don't have that information to hand, but I'm more than happy to get that information and review it. It should be the same. I mean, we have what we call the empty home standard, which basically dictates the standard that the empty houses, when they're signed up, should meet. And although there may be some interpretation, it should be applied right across the board. I mean, we don't do redecoration. We give a redecoration allowance, but yeah, I'm happy to look at that and come back to committee with an update on that.
Thank you. Dot, I see you popped your hand up there. Obviously, I've probably done something wrong.
No, not at all, Chairman, never. It was just to say that there's a commitment from the housing manager to bring forward the report on the tenant satisfaction survey to the November committee.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much for that confirmation. I don't think there is anything else specific on the housing report from Morag or Lackey, so you've got off relatively lightly today. Thank you for your forbearance and waiting for so long for this particular item. Thank you very much. Members, I'm going to suggest that we go into recess until 12:35. Can we be back promptly so we can start the Corran Ferry agenda item at that point? Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for your forbearance to allow councillors to have a short comfort break. So we've jumped forward to items 11 and 12 of the agenda to deal with the Corran Ferry update, and then allow the consultants to give their report on the socio-economic study that was commissioned by the council. We are joined by community representatives that are also members of the Corran Ferry steering group. So I can see Jill Calver, John Jones and Michael Foxley are representing West Ardnamurchan, Sunnet and Ardgour respectively. Apologies if there's anyone from Morven and Harrickle that I can't see on my list, but if you're here, you're extremely welcome. I think this is a significant update on the Corran Ferry, which Murray will go through in one moment. It's significant because although the steering group were disappointed that we were unable to persuade ministers and the Scottish Government to provide funding towards the next stage of the project, I am pleased that the council agreed to fund the £1.6 million in its entirety at their meeting in June. And since then, as you will see from the associated report, work has already started in terms of commissioning naval architects and the other work that is involved with this. But I'm sure, Murray, without stealing your thunder, you will give us a more comprehensive update.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yes, just what Andrew confirmed there. Good news, a major milestone was reached when the Council approved this 1.6 million funding to commence work on the feasibility and the design of 2 new vessels. So that'll be in conjunction with Transport Scotland and Seamill's small vessel replacement programme, so that the design of those vessels and the supporting slipways and infrastructure, marshalling areas, tide walls, etc. that'll be involved in that to accommodate the vessels. So really good progress is being made, and Seamill have now actually appointed the naval architect, quite a significant amount of people in for that tender. So they've got the naval architect in place. The first technical meeting is to take place on the 5th of August. We're expecting some basic concept drawings, not propulsion systems, anything like that, but some basic hull design drawings to be in place by September. So a separate technical meeting has been arranged between CMAL and ourselves, Highland Council, and this is going to take place this Wednesday when we're down visiting the Narrows anyway. So the talk we've had with CMAL, are really good discussions with CMAL on their small vessels replacement programme. We've attended several of their monthly meetings, and what it's looking like now is that a third design may be required for the Coram vessels. As anybody local down there will be well aware, the range that they're working in CMAL is for vessels to be 15 to 20 car or 20 to 25 car. Now that range we're thinking is going to be too small for the Coram vessels, so we'll be looking for something maybe a bit bigger than that. So a key consideration for the vessel design will be how big they're going to be, and we're looking at something beyond that range of 25 car vessels, bearing in mind that for 3 months of the year we'll be operating with just one vessel while we're swapping them over if we're going to refit. So we'll have to carefully consider the modelling that we're doing just now to get that size of the vessel, how big it's going to be right. And as we all know, it's a short crossing, so we want to minimise the vessel's superstructure and just maximise the vessel capacity. So that's perhaps not in line with some other CMAL vessels that they've got currently. And as a minimum, we need both vessels to accommodate 2 articulated lorries and also approximately 14 cars. So modelling's well underway. We're speaking with CMAL and just carefully calculating what that final size of vessel is going to be before taking that back to members. And also note that really good progress has been made. We're working closely with the Council's project design unit. We're currently progressing a professional service contract through the Scotland Excel framework, and that's to procure an external source to commence the feasibility preliminary design of the slipways infrastructure to support these vessels. So that's all from me. I was keeping it brief because I'm mindful I really like to give Stantec the time to do their presentation on the Narrows socioeconomic study, which is a valuable part of our outline business case, but I'm happy to take any questions on the report that's been submitted to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. That's much appreciated. I will allow, if Councillor Thompson's happy with this, I think he's just put his hand up, but I would like to go to the community representatives as our guests, first of all, on this occasion, if that is okay. If they have any specific questions for Murray in relation to what he's just told us. Don't think there are. No, but hopefully some good news that you can report back to your next round of community councils. Michael, I've seen your hand go up. Sorry, I missed that. So I'll go to you first of all, Michael.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks for allowing the community reps to take part. I think it's first of all, really appreciate Murray's update. Very positive news about the council commitment to fund this very initial stage. Just a couple of comments. One is, which Murray's alluded to, about the ferry size, and the ferry has been exceptionally busy recently, and I think it needs to be within the model of the 2 ferries, the absolute largest capacity and capability possible. The second thing is the ongoing saga, which is a complete disaster of Transport Scotland, CMAL and CalMac. So to be quite blunt, I think we need to make sure that the naval architects and the teams that are working from Transport Scotland and CMAL are a bit sharper than what they've been doing so far with the CalMac fleet, which is as bad as it's ever been since Victorian times. And part of that is the proposal about the propulsion system. It's a very, very short crossing, as we all know. And there's been some real concerns raised about the current state of electric engines. So certainly the feedback I've been getting across the area is to look at some sort of hybrid to cover that. But thanks for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I, as always, appreciate that, Michael, and some points extremely well made, particularly about CMAL and Transport Scotland. And I would concur with you that I would not want to see any diminution in the terms of the capacity of the ferries that we had previously discussed. Before I come back to you, Murray, to allow you to respond to Mr. Foxley. I will go to Councillor Thompson first of all, and then Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I think it's worth just pausing on that point about the council agreeing to fund the 1.6 million. I think it's been a great mark of support for this project, and a lot of that I think is due to excellent work that Murray has done. And I think it's another fantastic report before us. It's been a very impressive amount of work done by council officials. So thank you for that. The question I have is on a topic that Michael raised or mentioned about the propulsion system. The council has committed itself to an ambitious environmental target in terms of climate change. What I don't see in the report is the place where a decision will have to be made about how that is put into practice through Corn Ferry. And what I'm specifically referring to is the propulsion system, whether it goes for an all-electric option or a hybrid battery diesel option. I think we're probably all well aware of the rapid growth of electric ferries on longer crossings, much longer crossings than this one that's happening in Norway. I think they're up to 31 ferries now, and they're probably going to double that in very short order. So it's really, the question is about the process. Where and when would the BA, because this would have to be a political decision, I think, as to what propulsion system, obviously advised by officers, but where in the process and when would that decision be made about the propulsion system? And to what extent will we be able to make a well-informed decision on the environmental benefit of an electrical system versus a hybrid system? Is that information being built up as part of the investigations? Because presumably the naval architects will need to say this is what the fuel consumption of the two vessels we're designing would be. So just understanding that process, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. And I realise that's an issue that you've raised previously and fed back to the steering group on an earlier occasion as well. But you're quite correct that we need to remain focused on that, and Murray will be able to deal with that particular issue for you. I'll go to Councillor Rickson as the last question that I have indicated from colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. Murray, I noticed, and thank you for the report, by the way, I noticed in 27.1 you outlined that the ferry will then operate on a break-even basis for the longer term. So we're not thinking about building up funds for any future replacements and so on. In that eventuality, what sort of lifespan are we talking about for these two new ferries? What could we anticipate by way of a lifespan for those? And the second point, Chair, if I may, is adding to what Councillor Thompson just said. I think the Future Maritime Fuels Group, which you've outlined on pages 58 and 59, is a really good idea. I mean, I think that's a really positive group. The only thing is that technology changes really quickly. I think it's important from the public point of view that that group feeds back its findings. We talk about hydrogen and ammonia being some distance away, but of course electric is still here, or hybrid, as Councillor Thompson's just outlined. But I think there has to be a continual process of feedback from that group to the public, so that the public are taken with us in any decision that's made in the future. But Councillor Thompson's touched quite rightly on the issue of governance, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Some important points there, particularly in terms of lifespan of the ferry, and hopefully we will at some point be retiring them before they reach their natural lifespan, because of course there's another piece of work that is alongside this, which is looking at options for a fixed crossing as well. But let's not muddy the waters with that today. But Murray, can you answer those particular points from Michael, Ben and Dennis?
Yes, yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yes, starting off with appreciate Michael's point, the largest capacity possible. You know, we have to get that right because we have to factor in, peak periods in the morning and in the afternoon, and you'll see through the socioeconomic study we're just going to get presented that sort of highlights that how busy the ferry is, and also we've looked at the trends of business growth, tourism growth, staycations, of course. We've got to factor all that in and think about getting the right size of vessel over the 30-year period. But we're getting close to what we call that magic number of what the vessels are going to be, and obviously we'll be feeding back to the steering group and the various committees on what our findings are once that modelling is complete. Now, regarding the propulsion system, and hybrid vessels and CMAL's vision for their small vessels replacement programme is, the default just now is marine gas oil, diesel. But their vision is for hybrid vessels, so it will be a mixture of the two, and they have them on their fleet. And we're due to visit one of them, the MV Catriona down at Loch Ranza down there. We're going to have a tour of that and visit that and see what that hybrid vessel looks like. And bearing in mind, that's still quite a fairly old vessel nowadays, and that technology is involved and battery technology is improved. So it will be changing. So we're looking at all that. But the key thing here, which is a tricky thing for this type of crossing, is that it has to be safety comes first, obviously, without question, and then it has to be reliable. So reliability has to come before the green credentials. So it's tricky factoring in all that. But the vision that CMAL have got for their small vessels replacement programme is hybrid vessels with evolving battery technology, with a view to going all electric, and that's what's sitting in that programme. But we're leaving no stone unturned in engaging with, future maritime fuels group, and you can see there's quite a considerable that other local authorities. So the tricky thing for the council is picking the option of least regret, because as Councillor Rickson has just alluded to there, this technology is evolving and ever changing, and there's hydrogens in the horizon as well. It's not there yet for this type of vessels, but it's certainly coming. So in our statement requirements for the Highland Council's vessel, we've put in an option for retrofitting hydrogen technology when it becomes available. So it's just the balance of getting that right. And that's really where we are with it. And in terms of making that decision, that's something that will be taken back to members with the as part of the outline business case, what the options are for this technology. And we're also in close communication with our climate change team at the council as well, to get their thoughts. So, sorry, I noticed
Councillor McLean. Yeah, Councillor McLean's got his hand up. So here's the question, and then we'll move on to Stantec.
Yeah, so welcome the fact that you're looking at the retrofitting of hydrogen. Is it possible to put in the specification that the propulsion system entirely should be accessible for change? I know there's been issues with the previous vessels in the past that when there's breakdowns, that there's parts of the vessel that are difficult to access. So surely they should be designed this time round so that the propulsion systems are fully accessible.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor McLean. Yeah, I've noted that, and we're happy to share the statement of requirements that's been sent to that we've put together for the council's requirements. Yeah, I'll take note of that.
Thank you. There being no other questions, can we move to item 12, which is the socio-economic study? And we're joined by Stephen Reid and Stephen Canning, who have previously been at committee meetings. So welcome back, gents, both from Stantec. And which one is it that is going to be leading? I think it may be Stephen Canning by the smile on his face.
That was just
no,
the
you
question
got
we usually get with
wrong. Stephen Reid.
All right, okay. Stephen Reid, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Is everyone able to view my screen okay? Is that presentation shared?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having us along. I'm Stephen Reid. I'm the project manager for this study, and Stephen Canning, who is the project director. We've both previously been involved in the Corn Ferry Stag appraisal and also in the fixed link feasibility studies. And this is our third piece of work, now looking at the socio-economic study, which we'll take you through today. So the purpose of the socio-economic study is to analyse the economic, social and community value of the ferry service to the residents and businesses of the kind of wider study area around the peninsula and Mull as well. The outputs of this study is to feed into the outline business case that Murray just touched on there, that him and his team have been developing, with the outputs helping to feed the socio-economic case of that 5-stage business case. And as you touched on there about the kind of vessel development and options would feed into the kind of commercial case, where some of the information from this would also feed into that in terms of forecasting of future demand. The importance of this study is to try and determine the value of the ferry to the communities within the study area. And the one way that we've decided to try and demonstrate that value is to test the logic through the hypothetical scenario of where the ferry no longer runs. Therefore, trying to identify what would then happen to the system, to the way that the communities work if that ferry was no longer there. And we tested this through imparting a kind of logic map exercise and then following that through with engagement to try and test the logic. So our approach has been twofold. Initially, we started off doing a kind of baseline of the socioeconomic status of the peninsula and the wider study area. And this was just doing data analysis of readily available data sets. And then we also undertook a programme of engagement, and this involved consultation with key stakeholders. We had 3 local business surveys live as well, one targeted at kind of tourist-based businesses, one at logistics and freight, and then a kind of catch-all for all other businesses. And then we also had a kind of public survey, voice of the customer survey, of which we got 563 responses, 50% of those responses coming from peninsula-based residents. So it's quite a good return on that. And this information has then helped to feed into the study and to help define that logic and demonstrate the value of the ferry. So the first key question we asked ourselves is, why is the ferry so well used? So we kind of looked at the kind of makeup of the peninsula. And under Scottish Government classifications, the peninsula is classified as a very remote rural area. This is a classification that takes account of the number of population and the travel time to access key services. So by definition, the peninsula, by the Scottish Government identification, is very remote. The economic vitality of the peninsula is heavily dependent on the ferry to connect into the wider Lochaber area and beyond. For employment, accessing health and education, so kind of key services, supply chain movements, for tourism and public service delivery. The scale of that economic interaction is afforded by the ferry in part acting as a bridge, with a kind of high frequency, often departing from timetable into shuttle mode to accommodate the demand to get back and forth. Without the ferry, the only alternative is obviously to use the kind of road network. We've done a lot of analysis on journey time and cost. Just a quick kind of overbrief here. On average, residents of Morven to access Fort William would see an increase of 16 minutes per direction and an increase in cost of £5.65. So that's taking into account fuel costs and operating your vehicle. And then obviously to go to Ballachulish, so using that as a kind of default in terms of heading A82 south or coming northbound, you're looking at an increase of 45 minutes and then again an average cost increase of £13.45. And this is based on a population weighted average. We have calculated this for every postcode within the peninsula, so we have that included within the report, so you can see each community's impact. Also, another important stat is the increase of the usage in the ferry. Between 2013 and 2019, we've got a kind of compound annual growth rate of 2.1% in vehicle traffic on the ferry. So that's shown a very healthy growth in demand on the ferry service over that period in time, up to 2019. We've avoided obviously looking at data post that due to the kind of COVID implications, and we don't want to muddy the waters. So we've looked at everything up to 2019 in this instance. So why is it important to understand the value of the ferry? As we've touched on, the ferry is under significant pressure currently. There's an urgent need to replace the relief vessel, the Medical and Cool. demand is exceeding capacity at peak times, which is extending into 9 months of the year with a lot of queuing, especially back up onto the 82. And the current crew level is at the minimum required to operate the service. And it also has an aging demographic, so there's a concern there to look at succession planning and looking at the kind of future sustainability of the service. Without investment, obviously the service offered by the ferry could be compromised and eventually could lead to a cease in operation of the ferry. While the current fares are enough to kind of wash the face of this current service, it's not enough to meet the future needs of investment within the service. Therefore, there is a requirement to find that funding, which either has to be found within the Highland Council itself or found externally within the Scottish or UK governments. And to be able to tap into those kind of funding elements, you need to complete this business case requirement. And this is what Murray and his team are undertaking just now in terms of the outline business case, with the Corn Ferry options appraisal back in 2018 forming the strategic outline business case. And then this study then helps to fulfil that socioeconomic context within this OBC. So the way that we went about to demonstrate the value of the service in terms of how we feel we can demonstrate this is we often find that people find it hard to express the value they perceive from a service or from a network, from a road, from a bridge, from a boat. So the way that we've done this is to consider the three main users of the ferry and then thought out the kind of behavioural responses that could occur if there was no ferry operating across the Narrows. So we had a focus on residents, businesses and tourists. So we developed these kind of logic maps. We then used the engagement programme and some of the baseline data analysis to help inform and refine those logic maps. And then by evidencing that chain of logic, by extension, we can then demonstrate the value the ferry has to those communities, to those tourists and to those businesses. So an example of one of those logic maps is on the screen just now. I know this may be hard to view. Those who are using Teams, you can hold down your control button and the middle scroll button on your mouse, you can zoom in and out. But on this context, what we have here is a kind of 5-element chain within our logic map. The context is basically the current situation within the study area. So in this example, we're looking at peninsular residents. The input is the feature that's at risk of disrupting the current way that things operate. So in this instance, the removal of the ferry service. The output of that would be that everyone would then witness an increase in journey time and cost associated with making a journey. And then the outcomes of that, from this perspective, we're looking at kind of employment based. We have the three main strands, which has no impact. People continue in their same job, so they'll still make the journey and absorb those costs, or they would give up that job. And then the impacts associated with that. So in most cases, that resolves around income and the level of reduced disposable income, and then the multiplier effects of that. So therefore, people have less money to spend locally in local businesses, so there's less money in circulation within the peninsula or the kind of wider study area and so forth. So we have these logic maps developed for each of those kind of user chains to map that through and help guide the study. So the implications for a resident, if there is a no ferry, is that the main one would be that there would be a poorer employment outcomes, so and a reduction in disposable income. So from our economic impact assessment, we've evaluated that potentially there could be a loss of 440,000 annually in terms of disposable income across the whole peninsula. There's also the threat of a reduction in jobs. So again, from that modelling, we've estimated that this could affect up to 106 jobs on the peninsula, and that includes 14 crew members. The reduction in income and employment would obviously see, a rise in people claiming benefits. Now this is hard to model, but the closest thing that we could have to demonstrate this is recently, obviously through COVID, where the tourism sector was closed down. We've seen an increase in those claiming benefits on the peninsula by 170%, and in the wider study area, a further 135% claiming credit. The loss of disposable income could therefore reduce the aggregate demand on the peninsula and may act as a push factor, so encouraging families to leave the area if they have less income and higher costs. From the survey analysis, we found that 9% of respondents indicated they would leave if the ferry was not there. A loss of population, especially in a kind of remote area such as the peninsula, would weaken the critical mass that's required to help support the economic vitality of the area. In this instance, you know, we would see a kind of increase in the age profile if we see a lot of the kind of younger cohorts leaving the area to seek further employment opportunities or education opportunities. This could also threaten the viability of local services. So, you know, being able to keep the schools running, operating bus services from, you know, Shields buses. It would reduce the attractiveness of the peninsula for encouraging in-migration from other areas of Scotland. And it would also increase the perception of isolation and rurality for locals as well. So they would have that feeling of isolation. So overall, from a resident perspective, in a no ferry scenario, you would see a significant reduction in the ability for residents to access employment, access key services, social activities, and by fact see a reduction in the income and spend. For businesses, the impact of a no ferry would see a customer base diminish. Especially for the peninsula, where there's been quite a high number of people employed in the kind of tourism sector. And in 2019, there was 300 people in that sector. Within the wider study area, there was about 2,800 in total, which accounts for a third of all employment in the region. So you could see that customer base diminish. The labour pool would reduce if people are no longer making that journey to get to jobs. This will make it harder to fill job vacancies or to match skills for certain jobs. Over the past 5 years, we've identified that there's been a 14% increase in the job density, which means you're now almost at an equivalent of 1 job per head of working age population. If that continues, you'll have more jobs than people. Business costs would increase, particularly for logistics and freight businesses, working on standard freight charges in terms of how much it costs to operate per mile. Using again Ballachulish as an example of going 82 south or north, for the small load of 7.5 tonnes, you're looking at an increase of almost £50 just to make that journey from the peninsula to that pinch point, and then that could go up to £90 for a 44 tonne load. For rural haulage businesses, so it's particularly those on the peninsula, any significant increase in costs is likely to have a detrimental effect, as they tend to just be operating above the kind of operational margin just now. And the key risk of that would then be that one of those logistical operators then pull out of the market, which could severely disrupt the current supply chain. So for the implications for businesses, therefore, is that the immediate increase in cost of serving and doing business in the peninsula become less attractive, and therefore there could be a kind of ongoing spiral in terms of detrimental impacts across the area. From a visitor's perspective, we've looked at the kind of day tripper market, the through trip market, and we've looked at those who do overnight stays or the kind of multi-night stayers. For the day trip market, from the survey analysis, we've seen that there could be a significant reduction in the number of people making those day trips, and by consequence of that, the money they then spend as part of that day trip on the peninsula or within the area. There will be some geographic winners and losers as a consequence of that in terms of a redistribution of spend. So people may not travel as far as Morven anymore. They may just go to, Ardnamurchan or Acharico, if they're coming off the A830 instead. So one area may diminish while another may benefit from that redistribution. The NCN 78 will be severed, as the current ferry obviously provides a link there. So passing trade would diminish, especially for the in Ardgour. It would lose a lot of passing trade from cyclists, and then also the subsidy for the passenger ferry would then increase for the return link. A reduction in the car-based visitors would obviously, again, have a loss of passing trade for a lot of local businesses, particularly those en route to the ferry across the Mull. A few of those may see a loss in revenue. From an overnight stay or a multi-stayer, these are the most significant impacts, because these are the guys that spend the most amount of money because they're there for a longer period of time. So again, you're likely to see a significant reduction in spend, a reduction in demand, and the consequences of that is that there would be a less investment in the kind of supply side. So less investment in cafes, restaurants, bed stock, other businesses coming forth, the rise of Airbnbs. From our survey, on average, for a travelling party, we've worked out that they spend on average about £451 a week on just other spend. So that's restaurant spend, cafe spend, activity spend, and then about an average of £714 on accommodation. So in a no ferry scenario, to conclude from the visitor perspective, you're looking at a significant reduction in that tourist trade. And then by definition, the kind of consequential impacts of that to local businesses and to residents, and again, that kind of circle of diminishing return throughout the region. In terms of what does this all mean in money, the two key proponents that we look at to cost this up is the kind of transport associated costs and a GVA equivalent. From a transport perspective, this includes modelling for the next 60 years, the number of current users on that ferry service and what that would mean to them in terms of a disbenefit. So if they no longer can make that short journey across the ferry, they now need to make that road-based journey. So this now includes the cost of their time, the cost of travel, the cost of operating their vehicles, the maintenance, so forth. So when we calculate that over a 60-year appraisal period, that looks like it will disbenefit current ferry users to the tune of 71 to 78 million, or on average, that works out about 1.9 million per annum as a disbenefit to current ferry users. In terms of GVA, as I touched on previously, this would look at a loss of 106 jobs on the peninsula, which includes 14 crew members. And this would look to a loss of 58 million over the next 30 years in terms of GVA. For a comparison in terms of the TE calculation, if we reduce that back to 30 years to be equivalent, that works out about 46.3 million. So it is a significant number impacting the communities. In terms of a no ferry scenario, the other alternative is to look at upgrading the 61 as another solution. So what we've done is some high level civil engineering calculations to work out how much that would cost to take that road up to a standard to be able to accommodate the traffic that the ferry normally carries each year. From our calculations, that would come in about 190 million to upgrade that to a single carriageway standard. And that is from the slips at Ardgour right round to where it joins the A830, and also includes lowering the carriageway to avoid the low bridge at Drumsally as well. So that includes quite a high cost in terms of the Network Rail to be able to do work around that bridge. The key takeaway points from that price is that is significantly more expensive than the bypass for Stromferry that the THC have been trying to get for a number of years. Although you would upgrade the standard of that road, that does nothing to address the journey times and distance to make the journey. The sole cost of the road, as it's currently under the responsibility of the Highland Council, they would need to fund that or else find external funding for that. The full cost of it would be upfront as opposed to over a period of time, and it is a lot more expensive than a fixed link. And there's likely to be significant environmental issues with getting consenting to build this road. So that would include obviously taking away habitats, building out over water, so causing disturbance to the water there and the kind of fish farms in that kind of area. So again, there'll be difficulties in being able to get that upgrade. So in conclusion, from the study, what we've managed to evidence here is that the Corn Ferry plays a significant role in the sustainability of the peninsula communities and supporting businesses and the tourist trade within the area. A no ferry scenario is likely to have significant impacts to these users. There is likely to be a large number of overlaps there in terms of the impact. For example, we've said here that a loss of jobs would be compounded by a reduction in visitor income, potential to increase the supply chain costs and the multiplier effects, accommodated with each of those. So it's just going to, compound the losses and create this vicious cycle of decline. So the viability of the peninsula could reduce significantly over time. The key aspect of this is that it would then act as a push factor, which could push families out of the peninsula to relocate elsewhere. And this would undo all the good work that's been done so far to try and retain population and grow population within the rural communities. Obviously the development in high schools and things like that, and bus services. And also with a reduction in the kind of rural communities, it then makes other services less viable. So obviously the public services, so your bin lorries, gritting the roads, running the schools, all the kind of NHS costs, emergency services, the associated impacts with that as well. So in short, without a fixed link and without a ferry serving these communities, the sustainability of the peninsula communities would be under substantial threat. And that brings me to a conclusion for today's presentation. We have produced a report for Murray's team that he now has that goes into a lot more detail and breaks each of these elements down and explores each of those chains of logic with the evidence. And we have also produced some dashboards, interactive dashboards that everyone will be able to access as well, which shows the kind of responses from the surveys. So you can see the kind of breakdown from that. And I'll be happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That is much appreciated. I welcome this presentation. I think this is a significant piece of work, but I recognise that there may be some out within the Lochaber communities that will say, well, why did we need this? Is this really telling us anything that we didn't know? And I would say that it does, and it is vital that we had this piece of work completed, because when we are proceeding with the outline business case that Murray spoke about on the previous report, when we are having to seek funding for replacement ferries, this report puts in very stark detail why a crossing at the Corrin Narrows is so vital for the future of the various peninsula communities. And I don't think it's just for outside organisations. I think it's important for within Highland Council as well, because I still hear reports of some within the council who are not entirely clear as to the importance of the Corrin Ferry in Lochaber. I've even heard reports of one senior councillor suggesting that we can always go around the A861. And I welcome the section of the report as requested by the steering group that we looked at that particular option. And I think a price tag of £190 million that would be required to upgrade that particular road to make it suitable as an alternative route, let alone the additional economic costs that would be borne by peninsula residents, make it quite clear that that is in no way a viable option. So the only options for servicing and accessing the peninsulas is via the Corrin Narrows, whether that's through the ferry in a short term or across a fixed link in the longer term. So I appreciate particularly that part of the report. Now, there was one initial question that came up in the chat, and I think I'm going to ask that of you, Stephen, because I know that the person that asked it, Jill Calver and Trish Kennedy, sometimes have difficulty being heard on Microsoft Teams from previous meetings. And they were querying right at the beginning of your presentation, the part about additional journey times if there was no ferry. And I think from memory, you quoted an additional 16 minutes from anyone from the Morven Peninsula to Fort William. And they were suggesting that they thought that that was on the low side from experience. So can you just explain to us how you worked out that figure in layman's terms? And I must, and from my point of view, those figures, are they based on me driving up onto the ferry slipway at Ardgour and being able to drive straight on to the ferry and cross, or are we assuming that I drive up and I have to wait the normal maximum time to be able to join the ferry at that stage? So can you deal with that question first of all, Stephen, and then I'll open it up to everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. So the journey time analysis, what we have done there is made use of Google API calculations. So we have extracted journey times from leaving at, we're looking at a business perspective here, so moving to employment, we've looked at leaving at 8 AM, how long would that take you to make that journey in a with and without ferry scenario? The with ferry scenario is correct. That would assume that you just drive up, drive on, and away you go. So it does not have that wait calculation within there. Our TE benefit calculation does include 3 scenarios of a 5, 10, and 15-minute wait to determine that value in terms of comparisons for economic reasons. But from journey times, we have run that calculation from every postcode within the peninsula. From the Morven ones, obviously based on the geographical expanse of the area, we have taken a population weighted journey time in that respect, but within the report we do have it broken down by postcode, so you will be able to see the different levels. So not everyone is obviously impacted by the same travel time. So one resident area of the Morven might have a 16-minute, but another area might have something to do with 25 to 30 minutes. So that is all captured within that report, and it is captured by the number of population within each of those postcodes, so we can then work out the number of people who are disbenefited by those different journey times.
Okay, thank you for that, Stephen. I understand the methodology, and I think other people will appreciate that. My follow-up question for that is that assuming a scenario that I am driving along that particular road and I have free movement along its entire stretch, which is not the reality of driving along a single track road in the Highlands, and particularly that road where you are faced with a great deal of traffic coming in the opposite direction and being required to pull over into a passing place on an extremely frequent basis. And Michael Foxley in particular, as a resident along that road, will be well aware of that, as will others. So could you just deal with that? And then I'm going to move across to community questions.
Yeah, that is based on his...
Can I just perhaps pick? Yep. Can I just perhaps pick that one up, because I want to put a comparator on that one. So yeah, that, I think Steve was about to say, that is based on actual historical travel time data, so it's accurate as to the current day. But I think the wider and more important point here in the no ferry scenario is the traffic on those roads would change quite significantly, and those journey time reliability would worsen. And I think the obvious comparator in that respect was Mull, once RET was introduced. And you used to have a reasonably reliable journey from Craigmuir to Finnefort. And then once there was a whole heap of extra volume, road traffic volume pushed onto those roads, that journey time reliability has diminished very significantly. I strongly suspect something similar would happen here in a no ferry scenario. Sorry, Steve, let's get you off there.
No problem at all. Yeah.
Thank you very much, both Stevens. I'm going to go to the community again, councillors, if you're content with that. And just to say to Jill and Trish, if you are having if you can pop your digital hand up, and then I will know that you want to ask a question, rather than, if you're able to do that, please do that rather than putting it in the chat box, which creates problems for us. But if you can't, I will still monitor the chat box and ask those particular questions on your behalf. So I'm going to go to John Jones first, then Michael Foxley, and then finally to Jill Calver as the 3 that have got their hands up at the moment. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Councillor Baxter. What I was wondering was, using Google, what was the average speed assumed? Because, as the point you made very validly, is the fact that, yes, that would assume perhaps a clear road, not necessarily with all the other traffic and the nature of traffic coming the other way. If it's articulated lorries and stuff like that, and the need to back up and reverse and pull in and things, it significantly increases the journey time.
Okay, before coming to you, Stephen, can I deal with the other questions and try and bundle them up, and then you can deal with them in their entirety. So across to you next, please, Michael.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. 2 points. The first point is how Corran Ferry serves Mull. So when the Carusk was off for 5 days for their main crossing between Oban and Mull, Oban Craigmuir, that traffic was being routed via Corran to Lochaber Fishnish, and that's clearly their fallback. That's CalMac's fallback when they have problems with that route. And I think that part of the report should be amplified. The second thing is what you've just been discussing, and I appreciate the report and the outcomes. I mean, it would clearly be catastrophic for those of us to live to the west of Lochiel and Loch Linney, particularly the cost of the road. But I would make a plea that you revisit these journey times. Most of us who use the ferry regularly, apart from peak times like changeover day on Saturday, you time yourself to get there a couple of minutes before the ferry would leave unless it's exceptionally busy. So Morwen to Fort William was 60 minutes. I had to urgently get home and I just missed the ferry at Corran, and I'm not a slow driver, and I drove flat out to get home, and I arrived exactly the same time as if I'd waited for the next ferry. So Morwen to Fort William is really 30 minutes, and that's at best, because the other point that was made by several people, including the community councillor just now, is what happens on the 861. And what happens on the 861 is most of the people who don't normally drive, all the visitors and people, the townies who don't normally drive on single track roads, they clump. So you end up with about 6 vehicles meeting another 6 vehicles, and they can't pass each other in the usual passing places, which is what happens with the normal level of traffic. So every time the Corran Ferry is off, that's the scenario we experience. And after a wee while, one of the large lorries or vehicles ends up in a ditch and completely blocks the road. The journey time when the ferry is off sort of trebles at least. I would say that Morwen to Fort William should be allowing 30 minutes, and that's at best. Morwen to Ballachulish, instead of 45 minutes, I would say 70 minutes. And you've also got to allow with the scale of traffic congestion that we have in Fort William, which a few days ago was the backup from the A82 extended as far back as Corpach. So that's adding another 30 minutes. The reason I know the councillors and the community councillors know this, but I really would make the plea that you revisit those times, because that's the critical bit. The impact is very substantial. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, and I'm sure Fort William Traffic Police will be particularly eager to check your journey times. I've seen you driving, and I would pull over if I knew you were behind me. But I'm sure Stephen has got the point that's been made by you, and I would concur as someone who in the past has frequently had to come back from evening meetings after the ferry and drive that long way round back to Kinlochleven, that it is significantly more even when the road is quiet, relatively quiet later at night, than going across the ferry. And I'm sure other community representatives will make that point as well. So I'm going to go to Jill next from West Ardnam Merkin Community Council.
Yeah, I'd just say that the figure that you should be putting in is not 16 minutes extra from Google. You should be looking at the figure that Michael just said. When the ferry is off, that would be the relevant figure. So how long it takes to get from Ardgour to Fort William or Ardgour to Ballachulish when the ferry is off is the relevant figure, not the figure that Google gives for a clear run through when the ferry is running.
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting that. Thank you, Jill. Are there any other questions from community representatives? I don't think there is. So, Stevens, do you want to just briefly respond to the points about the traffic, the travel times, and what additional work you might be able to do on that?
Yeah, I can pick that up again. In terms of, if I address the open query first as well, we have looked at the impact of disruption to the open services and what that means for the Fishnish service as well, Loch Highland service. So we have got that in the report demonstrating the importance of the Corn Ferry in terms of meeting that as a diversionary route. We can see that the average occupancy on those boats do increase when there's disruption on the Oban Craignoor route. So we have evidence that to show the value of the Corn Ferry in terms of linking into Mull. In terms of the journey time analysis, just coming back to that, the way that we've used Google is based on it's a year's worth of average historical data. Obviously, we can't model every different scenario that could occur on the road network, so it's hard to demonstrate that. So this is an average journey time calculated over a whole year to do that journey in a with and without scenario. I have done a validation exercise using Transport Scotland's INRIX data, which also gives us historical data. So that's from two different sources. So the way that Google's data is derived is through people using that as their, journey analysis. So they might use that in their smartphones to tell them directions and how to make that journey. The INRIX data does likewise. That comes from SatNav. It comes from TomTom. So inbuilt SatNavs within your vehicle. And that also gives you the journey time analysis. When I've done a validation of those two data sets, the INRIX data and the Google data was within 5 minutes of each other in terms of the same period of time at the same time of day. Again, using a with and without ferry scenario. Now, I appreciate that you will get platooning effects on the road network where you are stuck behind camper vans or you are stuck behind HGVs, and it does increase that time by 10, 15, 20 minutes. It's just hard to evidence that with the data sets that we have available to be able to track that down and make that implication. We have noted within the report that is something that we have caveated those times by saying that this is a historical average, but there will be those implications that we can't accurately model. And that has been noted in the report to just say that this is, a worst case scenario in Google, but in reality, we know that it is larger impacts than that.
I think it's the issue of journey time reliability and being able to plan for that unreliability is the question. So you will always build in more time than perhaps what a SatNav would tell you, which we have noted in the reporting. And I suspect in peak summer that becomes even more of an issue. And then if you layer the no ferry on top of that or a ferry cancellation, that point becomes even more stark.
Okay, thank you. Normally I would try to limit secondary contributions because this is part of a wider area committee, but on this occasion, because this is so important, I'm prepared to go back to Jill, Michael and John in that order, because I know you wanted to respond to those last comments, but let's not try to get too bogged down on this. I think we've made the point, but Jill, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I just think you've got to revisit that. I think 16 minutes is an absolute minimum excess. And Stephen, if you are so wedded to these Google figures, may I suggest that you drive it yourselves?
Point taken, Jill. John?
Sorry, I was just unmuting there. Just 2 quick points. In the modelling data, there was a period when the Corran ferry broke down for a number of weeks, and that's when the Highland Council had to do various bits and pieces, and lorries went off the road, etc. Were you able to access data from that period? The other thing is the community councillors have made comment here about the journey times and their views on journey times. Can those views be expressed in the final report, please.
Thank you, John. And finally, can I go to Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'm reminded that Google Maps recently suggested you went up by Nevis by parking up Glen Nevis and going straight up the hill, where people are killed regularly and often, sadly. I think this is the key point, because it's not just for this survey, it's what you said yourself, Andrew, about convincing other councillors. And 60 minutes doesn't really sound much of a burden, but the reality is 30 minutes in the best circumstances. And as soon, I'm not going to repeat all I said, as soon as you get heavy traffic on the A861 and the 22 miles wouldn't be improved, even if you had the 190 million in one tranche, the vehicles clump up, and the journey times increase 3-4 times. So maybe we need to put the Corran ferry off one afternoon with a bit of warning and just show what actually happens. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the three of you. Again, very valid and stark points, and one that I concur to as well. As local councillor, I do believe that this is significantly understated, but hopefully both Stevens have taken note of that and will respond accordingly for the final report. But I really do urge you to take another look at that, or and see how we can explain that maybe in a different way. And now I'm going to move over to my Lochaber colleagues, and I can see Councillor Rickson, you popped your hand up. Can I just ask Stephen, can you take off your presentation from the screen so that I can see everyone a little bit bigger? Thank you. So Councillor Rickson first of all, and then Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the two Stevens, for your presentation. I mean, obviously, you've had some local information which will possibly modify one or two bits of it. I like what you did. I think it's not anecdotal. I think it's based on sort of hard facts and figures, the sort of things which government and local government officers will pay attention to. So I think that's good. The only thing that I think is missing, which I'm hoping you will tell me is in your report, but just not in your presentation, is the effects on the wider area. For perfectly understandable reasons, you concentrate on the peninsula and so on, but of course it does have effects both in Mull and right the way up through Moor and Narrowsig into Skye. So for instance, on a previous council committee, one of the Skye councillors actually chipped in support of the Corran ferry. So I think it's really important that you spread the net widely in your report to capture the effects that it has on communities out with the peninsula area. The only other thing I would say is, could you perhaps explain or make sure that there is an explanation in your report to multiplier effects? Going back to whisper it softly, some dim and distant days in the past when I did a little bit of economics at university, many decades ago, I do remember something about multiplier effects, but I think it's important if other people are reading this report that they have explanations for technical terms from the field of economics they might not otherwise be familiar with. So I think that would be useful. But broadly speaking, I greatly welcome the report. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. The Stevens will respond to your specific point, but I would note that is something that the steering group discusses frequently, and the fact that the ferry has a much wider impact, as you described, has formed the basis of our communications and lobbying with both Scottish ministers, our local MSP, who is well aware of those issues, in Transport Scotland as well, and we reiterate that whenever we get the opportunity. Councillor Thompson, and then we'll go back to the Stevens if there's no other questions.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there's a good discussion there about the journey times, and I too was a bit puzzled by the difference. So I kind of echo the comments that are made about just going back to those. And I think as Jill made the very valid point that it's the important number is includes the impact of extra traffic when the ferry is off. I did wonder, just so I can think about it correct in my own head, what was the destination point you used for the modelling? So you explained where the start point was, but what was there a single destination point, and where was it, please? Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, can I ask you to deal with those 2 points?
Sure, yeah. For the wider impacts, we have obviously for the GVA analysis and the impacts to jobs and disposable income. That's been heavily informed by the returns to the survey. Although we did have, I think it was about 122 responses from the wider study area, a large proportion of that do not use the ferry as part of their commute. So it's harder to derive a value from that. We have made reference to it's an important fact for diversionary routing if there's any road closures on the 830 or the 82 between Instree and Fort William, but we have made reference to it in the report, but we just don't have the numbers to be able to back that up due to the kind of small returns from establishing a value there. In terms of the destinations,
maybe just add to that.
Sorry.
Yep. Steve, sorry, if I can just add to that point on the wide terrain, I equally agree as with a two-way street or two sides of the crossing here, and we initially were trying to look at this as two very discrete areas, peninsula and non-peninsula, and a lot of the sort of logic mapping showed the same effects. So a lot of the difference is magnitude of impact, and that is one thing we're trying to bring out across this, even within the peninsula itself. There are discrete sort of winners and losers on this. Sooner or Northern will be worst affected by the loss of the ferry, other areas less so. So we tried to bring out that analysis in a bit more of a spatial way in the reporting. Obviously, within a presentation, it's a bit more aggregated. But yeah, we will and have captured those points. Sorry, Steve.
No problem. Yeah, just to answer the question on destination points, the destination for Fort William was just the centre of Fort William, so we used a kind of central point. And for the Ballachulish, we used the Ballachulish Bridge as an indicator for those travelling south or northbound on the 82, because from the responses we've seen there was quite a significant amount of traffic that does make that movement from the OD analysis that we undertook. So that's why we've used that as a kind of default point.
Thank you very much. Did you have your hands gone up again, Councillor Thompson? Did you have a follow-up? Go on then.
Yeah, I was looking for a more specific answer than just the centre of Fort William, and local residents will understand why I'm asking this, because the geographic centre of Fort William is to the north of a very, very slow-moving bit of traffic. So you'll know where the congestion is in the Fort William area, and I just wondered if the numbers are being influenced by the fact you've chosen the geographic centre of Fort William as a destination. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yep. Just double check that. I think, I think we've actually taken the main car park areas just round to the south. Actually, I'll just double check that. So yeah, where the main car parks are to the south, we've taken.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, okay. Are there any other questions from anyone before I draw this discussion to a close? No hands indicated. If this is really a question for Murray and maybe to be dealt with within the next steering group meeting, but is how we're going to use this study now that it's been produced for us. But probably in the immediate term, I would be keen, as both area chairman and local councillor, that this is shared and briefed to the administration leadership team as a matter of priority at a very early stage. I think this is an important piece of work, and it should be separately briefed at a meeting of the administration leadership team, because I think that will assist discussions in the future. I see Councillor Thompson. I think he's nodding. I know he's a member of that team and he's well briefed on it anyway, as is Councillor Henderson, which means we have a part of an advantage. But I'm conscious that most of the rest of the team are Inverness or in Murray Firth members, so they have a different perspective from what we do. So Murray, if there's no other takeaway at the moment, can we ensure that we push for a meeting or a briefing of the ALT as a matter of priority?
Yes, thanks for that, Chair. I've taken a note from that, and following on from this presentation, I'll be touching base again with the two Stephens, and just finalising the report. So the report is also due to go to ECI on the 1st of September as well. Summary presentation.
Thank you. That's appreciated. There being no other questions to ask, can I thank both Stephens for a very clear presentation and for answering our questions. Hopefully you'll be able to go away and reflect on the local feelings about the journey times, and we'll appreciate that and look forward to your response. And can I say a special thanks to all of the community representatives for attending today, giving up your time. Your input, as it has been throughout all our steering group meetings, is vital to this process and much appreciated. And finally, once more, echo the comments of, I think it was Councillor Thompson early on. Thanks to Murray and all the work he has been putting into this project. You are certainly very much key to moving this forward, and your dedication to it is very much appreciated. Thank you, Murray. Thank you, and we'll move back to our agenda, and I think we are moving back to item 6. Feel free to leave, everyone. I don't expect you to endure the rest of a Lochaber area committee. I can see Michael disappearing as quickly as he can.
Thank you. Take care.
So item 6, let me just get back to my agenda, is place-based investment funds, proposed funding allocations as detailed in the report. Dot, do you wish to add anything to the report?
No, nothing to add to the report, but happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Okay, are there any questions, members, to the information that's detailed in the report? I think it's fairly straightforward, and councillors from both wards have had a previous opportunity to identify how they wish this fund to be used. Ward 21 from the report have decided to allocate the money accordingly to those particular projects, whereas Ward 11 are wanting to wait a little bit longer and deal with this as part of a future report. Everyone content with the recommendation? Don't see anyone descending. Okay, thank you very much. On to item 7, which is the Commando Memorial Garden Extension, as outlined in Dot's report. We've seen some media comment in the last couple of days on this particular issue, which is no surprise because it's important to so many people. Dot, is there anything you wish to add?
Only one thing just to update, Chairman, in terms of the section at 5.3, at the paragraph 5.3, we've been made aware that there may be issues in terms of the supply of materials, which would mean that we wouldn't be able to complete the works prior to Remembrance Day. So the timetable for the works will be sort of rescheduled once we have that funding package in place, but also once we know that the supply of materials can be secured, so that it does leave the site clear of any key commitments like that. There's also the potential that as we move forward and look at the phase 2, which is the cleaning of the memorial itself and the plinth and further works to the flagstones surround, that there is potential actually to do the whole site under one phase, subject to all the funding being made available.
Okay, thank you. Local members, are there any specific questions or points that you wish to make about this? No. Members, are you happy to agree the recommendation? I believe you are. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, which is the Mallaig Associated School Group overview. First time we've had an ASG report for some time, I think, and hopefully, I can't see him on our list, but hopefully we're joined by Don Essen. Yeah, he is on my list after all. Don, if you're happy, I will move straight to questions, if that's okay, because your reports are always so well presented and detailed. So I will move across. Local members, are there any particular questions or points that you wish to make in relation to Mr. Essen's report. Dennis, Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Don, good afternoon. Thank you for the report. Can I ask you some questions and make a couple of points, please? The simple points first. On page 26, when we're referring to RUM, and there's a table which indicates the cost per pupil there. Of course, that table was constructed when there were only 2 pupils in the school, and it therefore looks a fairly, astronomical sum. But of course, there now being 6 pupils in the school, that sum per pupil is reduced to about 18k or whatever it is, but it's not nearly so dramatic. So just to sort of, put that in context. There was one other thing which kind of concerned me in your condition report on page 27, which is that Malig High School, the condition is now marked as poor. The school was actually only opened in 1989, so we're only 32 years after opening, and it would worry me if we build a school which within 32 years has a condition marked as poor. Just like to hear any comments that you would like to make on that. But the substance of my questions are to do with the school in RUM. On page 25, the entry for RUM is blank. And I wonder if you could update us. I know we frequently talked about this in the past, but I wonder if you could update us for the benefit of other members with 2 or 3 items. One is with the progress for the nursery, where we are hoping to have nursery pupils starting at the beginning of next calendar year. Secondly, as you know, our current head teacher has been off for a substantial period of time unwell, and the schoolhouse is currently deemed uninhabitable. She lives in private accommodation on the island. The point being here that I think it'd be important to update members with where we are with making sure that in the future, should there be another teacher, that there is actually accommodation for them. Accommodation is critically short supply in RUM, and currently the supply teachers are based in a porta cabin which we brought over specially. And finally, if you could update us on the issue of the school boat, which returns pupils who stay in the hostel. I know that there are varying views amongst people or parents from different islands as to whether or not that should be as frequently as once a week or once a fortnight. I think we have reverted to a situation, the pre-COVID situation, of once fortnightly for these boats. The reason that I bring it up is I think there are completely valid concerns from different groups of parents in different islands. One wanting their children to come home on a weekly basis, and one concerned about a potential loss of schooling to their children if they do, because particularly in winter when they have to leave early because the weather is bad, there is a potential loss of a half day or more of school. And I would be glad to know whether we would consider having a weekly boat, and whether we also consider keeping the hostel open for those children who perhaps wouldn't be going home on a weekly basis, but perhaps only fortnightly. If you could just update us on these points, I appreciate that some of them may still be very uncertain, but I'd be glad of that. And thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. As there's few questions there, I'll let Mr. Essen answer those ones first. Sorry, Don, for cutting you off there.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Chair and members. And thank you for allowing me to come along to the meeting, the committee meeting this afternoon. And thank you, Councillor Rickson, for your queries. I will give you the clarifications regarding that. Yes, obviously the pupil cost in RUM was taken into account the role pre the increase, and that was the figures that were in file. So that would have to be taken into account. We can now confirm that there are currently five pupils in RUM Primary School, and as you mentioned earlier, RUM Nursery School is currently inactive, but the forecast is that there'll be two children entering the nursery in January, and we're in a situation where obviously the nursery has been in the school previously. It was 2 sessions ago, and it has been from year to year. It varies depending on numbers, and that the post of early years practitioner will be advertised early in the new session, well in advance of January, for the reactivation of the nursery. In terms of Malig High School, in terms of the details about the building conditions and everything, these are the details which were got via the Highland Council officers in terms of buildings and properties. What I can do is query the actual details regarding, saying, Marlake High School and get back to you thereafter, but these are the details which we got. In terms of the nursery, I mentioned that it's in January and we'll have 2 youngsters entering it, and the post will be advertised in the near session, early in the new session. In terms of the schoolhouse, local members were updated relatively recently regarding this. The estates team, in communication with other members in the council, are looking at the situation, obviously, and reviewing the situation regarding the schoolhouse. The plans are that the schoolhouse will be demolished, and it is hoped that in the foreseeable future there'll be a new schoolhouse which will be able to accommodate a family, and possibly a kind of annex to it which would be able to accommodate further Highland Council employees, including supply teachers. I think those are the plans. There are no details and timescales regarding that at present. In terms of the school boat, members may be aware that for the last 15 or so years, since the opening of the new Marlake High School and the residents associated with that, there's been a fortnightly school boat for high school pupils going to the small isles, and this has worked very well for that period. During COVID restrictions and the lifting of lockdown, there was a slight change in order to support, obviously, the children and families, so the frequency was increased to once per week. And now that the COVID restrictions we're moving away from the mitigations, the plans are to go back to the fortnightly, as Councillor Rixton's highlighted, that there's been considerable representation both from communities and individual parents wishing for the service to be weekly, and also we've had representation regarding the service continuing on a fortnightly basis. We've done a provisional consultation around this, and the information is rather mixed, as Councillor Rixton highlighted, and what we're planning to do in the coming school session is to have further consultation with all the island communities around this, because we know that this is a very challenging matter which needs to be looked into in very much detail. So as we move forward with further consultations, I will keep local members in touch regarding the situation regarding that. In terms of the current situation, obviously in Rum we have had challenges, and local members, I've tried to keep local members as up to date as possible from month to month with the situation. We've got the head teacher has been on long-term sick leave, and we've been keeping you up to date regarding that. We're very fortunate that Louise Taylor, the head teacher in Egg and Muck, has been acting head teacher in Rum for a considerable period of time, and she's working closely with a number of teachers and supply teachers around that, and helping and supporting Rum Primary School. And again, there's been considerable information shared with members around that, and we know that this is particularly challenging, especially as in terms of accommodation, which Councillor Rixton mentioned, but also in terms of the fact that all the supply teachers live off island, and therefore the communications and transport and everything is dependent on the transport and obviously the ferries and availability. In the spring and summer and autumn months, it's normally quite good transport and communications, but we know that as we move into the winter months, then that can be even more challenging. But we're working very much with the local community around that and sharing the information as we move forward. And we know that there are particular challenges, but we're working as best we can to overcome those challenges. In terms of this coming session, I shared with members that we've appointed on a one-year fixed-term basis an additional teacher across the small isles to help and support with the ongoing challenges that we've had on Rum, because the current teacher across the small isles for CCR and management time has had to be drawn upon to support Rum. So hopefully that additionality will support the islands communities.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Don, for the answers there you gave to Councillor Rickson's questions. Can I just follow up on the point about the ferry first? You talked about it operating successfully. The word that you used was successfully on a fortnightly basis. I would have to say that during that period, I was canvassed by a number of parents complaining about that at the time. So it may have been operating successfully in a logistical sense, but in terms of parental wishes, it was certainly not frequent enough then. So I think at that point the issue was it was not clear how a weekly service was function. Now that's proven to be possible. I think we have a new benchmark effectively. So I understand there's reference. I can understand why there's reference to the previous 2 weekly period as being the benchmark. But I don't think that's quite fair. I think the situation has definitely moved on, and that's certainly how the parents, or the majority of the parents, have reflected that to me. I just wanted to make that point anyway, because I think the use of the word successfully had to be interpreted carefully, I think, as you described it. In terms of the Rum schoolhouse, it is disappointing how long this is taking. I had hoped that we would be getting, a quicker solution to a house build on the island. I think, when we were at the stage of having I think it was a motor caravan, a small motor caravan on the island, that was, there was seen to be some urgency. Now there's a caravan, there seems to be a reduction in urgency. I find that a bit frustrating. I think it's really, really important we get this bill done as soon as possible. I just don't think in terms of human welfare it's acceptable that we're asking staff to work out live in a caravan effectively. As well appointed as it might be, I just don't think it's something that's sustainable even in the short term. So I'll certainly be pushing hard to get that schoolhouse built as quickly as possible. Obviously, there's a new capital plan coming up for consideration by the council this year. I would expect it to be in there. The questions I wanted to ask, Don, were around, Dennis asked most of them actually, but the other one I wanted to ask was around the staffing level in the high school. And I know you've got a list of FTEs in the report. Can you tell us where we are in terms of filling those FTE roles and where there are gaps? For example, posts have been put out to advertisement. What has been the reason that those posts have not been filled? I am hearing some pretty, anguished messages from people looking for housing to fill jobs in the Mallaig, Arsig, Mora area, and I suspect that's having a really big impact on our ability to recruit. But it was just interesting to hear your perspective from the high school's point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. In terms of the staffing level at the school, you'll be aware that the staffing level is the staffing level via the staffing formulas for the size of the school, which takes into account that. In terms of, I don't have at hand specific details regarding the individual staffing at Mallaig High School. In terms of anecdotally, I would say at the end of the school session, we did hear that there had been some appointments made and concerns have been raised regarding housing in terms of two subject areas, and that one of the most important factors regarding declining posts was the lack of housing locally. So we know that that is incredibly challenging, and I know that the Highland Council are working very closely with the local members around that and with the local community. But this is a very, very challenging situation, even more challenging, I think, in the areas in the west of the Highlands, where we're very much reliant on the seasonal tourist trade, and where we've got summer lets and winter lets, and some of the challenges around that, and because of obviously the local lack of affordable housing as well. So it is very challenging.
Okay, local members content with those responses, no follow-ups from what I can see. As always, Mr. Essen, thank you very much for your contribution today. I have one little request. Next time you come, that's the second time we've seen a picture of Uig Harbour behind you. There's far more glorious aspects of Skye that you could be regaling us with than the harbour.
And have you got a particular request, Councillor Baxter?
Or something, I don't know, something like Duntome Castle, something like that. That's one of my, or maybe Talisker Bay. There you are.
Okay.
Yeah, that's your walk for the weekend, out to Talisker Bay to get a new backdrop for us.
That's quite a walk from Uig.
Well, that's fine, and you can bring some whiskey on your way back.
Thank you very much, Chair, members.
Thank you very much, Don. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Moving on, I think we are now on item 9, which is Lochaber Area Roads winter maintenance plan, and Richard is somewhere there in the ether. Rather than any presentation, because the plan is quite clear, I'll move straight to any questions on the plan that colleagues would like to make. And I can see now Richard's on our screen, and I hope that is not your forecast of the weather to come, or just simply illustrative of what you have to deal with. I actually have one question, Richard, based on the plan that you may recall. I think way back in the midst of last winter, we had some representations from residents on Memore Crescent in Fort William, where I believe the gritter virtually goes back along the same road twice and could go round that particular crescent. Were you able to look at that and consider that being added onto the secondary route without too much impact on the plan? In fact, probably minimal impact. I know it's a fairly minor issue and a minor road, but it would, as there has been requests there, if it was feasible, it would be sensible to add it. And whilst you're considering that, I'll just double check that none of my colleagues have specific questions to the plan. Can't see any of them popping their hands up. So Richard, can you just briefly deal with that?
Thanks. Yes, Chairman, members, Ward Manager. Yeah, I can confirm that that's something that we can accommodate relatively easily, so that shouldn't be an issue. Other than that, yeah, we're prepared for winter. Policy, budget and resources haven't changed. We've got our usual challenges in terms of drivers and vehicles and salt, but no problems that we can't overcome.
Okay, thank you. I think you've got off relatively easily this year compared to previous years, but there you are. Maybe that's a good sign that councillors are by and large are content with what's happening at the moment. Just wait until winter actually occurs, and then you'll get all the complaints, Richard, as usual. Okay, thank you, and apologies for making you wait for such a lengthy period of time for such a straightforward report, but it's important that it is here and that councillors have an opportunity to scrutinise it and make any changes or request changes where they see fit. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Moving on, confirmation of our minutes held on the 19th of April, previously agreed by full council. All happy to note those, no specific issues. No, so that brings us to the end of our committee meeting today. Thank you very much, members. Thank you, officers in attendance, for your contributions today, and always thank you to Alistair McInnes for keeping me on the straight and narrow. Relatively easy meeting for you today. Colleagues, we have a ward business meeting that is scheduled to commence immediately after this, but as we have not had a lunch break, I suggest that we do. If you're content, we'll have half an hour and reconvene using the other link that has been previously circulated for the ward business meeting at 2:40. Are you happy with that? Fantastic. See you shortly.
Thank you.